Good afternoon, everyone. I invite you all to be seated so we can get the proceedings underway. I'm Carolina Gonzalez. I'm a recent graduate at the University of Queensland, and I'm currently working as a postdoctoral research fellow in clinical psychology at the Parenting and Family Support Center here at UQ. I completed my Bachelor of Psychology at the University of Queensland, at the University of Talca in Chile. I would like to quickly go over some housekeeping first. In case of any emergency, please evacuate by the exits and follow directions from staff. For bathrooms, please go back into the foyer and follow the signage down the stairs. In terms of the acknowledgements, I would like to extend a very warm welcome to our guests, ambassadors, churches affairs, and other members of the diplomatic corps. Keynote speaker, adjunct Professor Jan Kemisch, AM, and panelists, representatives from government and industry, UQ colleagues, distinguished guests, and of course, our online viewers. We are thrilled that you could join us today. We are going to make this event as interactive as possible. Earlier today, you will have received an email reminder for the event with a digital copy of the program, and there are also some hard copies around the room. For our online viewers, please use the Q&A function for any questions. And in the in-person audience, we have two roving microphones for the Q&A sessions. You will see in the program, we are also using Padlet. This is a real-time collaborative web platform where you can share your comments, your notes, and content. I encourage you all to comment and network on Padlet throughout the colloquium, regardless of whether you are here in person or online. We will keep the Padlet online for a few weeks post the event for any other further comments or thoughts to keep the discussion and networking going. This event is also being recorded, and we will share the link with you all. Today, we are celebrating the 15th UQ Latin American Colloquium. This is a very big milestone for UQ, and I'm honored to be part of it. I have no doubt that today's theme, which centers on strengthening collaboration between Australia and Latin America towards 2030, will spark lots of discussion. We have a full schedule, so I will now hand over to the University of Queensland's Vice Chancellor and Deputy Vice Chancellor for External Engagement, Mr. Ron Yu Lee, to the lectern to say a few words. Welcome, Mr. Lee.
Carolina, good afternoon. It's great to see so many of you twice in a day, for a few others 3 times in a day. That's a great pleasure. The University of Queensland acknowledges the traditional owners of the land on which we are gathered here today. We pay our respects to elders past and present. It's a genuine pleasure to be able to welcome so many ambassadors and partners from government, industry, research, back to campus. I'd like to extend a warm welcome to our guests, especially ambassadors, chargés d'affaires, and members of the diplomatic corps. Welcome also to our speakers and panel members, both from within and outside of the university, including adjunct professor in Kemisch, AM, and to those of you who are joining us on the live stream. Welcome and thank you for being part of today's event. As Carolina said, we encourage online participation from all of our audience today. While we forged ahead during lockdown with online events, and while we certainly appreciate those of you zooming in today, nothing beats getting everyone in the room together. This is one of the few opportunities the university has each year to meet with so many ambassadors and leaders at the one time. Today marks a considerable milestone in our relationship. This is the 15th year UQ has delivered the Latin American Colloquium. 15 years since we first brought dignitaries, researchers, students, and industries together to showcase, celebrate, and collaborate. Many of you in this room have played a critical role in shaping the agenda, driving on-the-ground links, and supporting alumni communities. Your support and networks have been tremendously important for UQ as we have worked to build links in Latin America across teaching, learning, research, and innovation. Today, we will explore further how our countries can work together to tackle global challenges, including climate change, sustainable development, food security, biodiversity restoration, and healthcare. The theme, Priorities for Science Diplomacy, will highlight the importance of a strong and meaningful Australia-Latin American partnership as we move into the future. You can count on UQ to be an important part of the Australian-Latin American future. We are already heavily engaged in the region, and we look forward to expanding our academic partnerships, technological innovations, and trade relations with such an opportunity-filled part of the world. With energy and resources of critical importance to Australian and Latin American economies, research into sustainable mining practices is high on the agenda. The UQ Sustainable Minerals Institute International Centre of Excellence in Chile is a key link in the exchange of research and technology. Collaborations in the areas of bioeconomy, particularly biofuels, are also attracting global attention. As we speak, several of the university's leading academics are in Germany at the Global Bioeconomy Alliance Symposium, along with their peers from Sao Paulo State University and the Technical University of Munich. We are driven to leverage our shared research expertise to create a cleaner, more sustainable future. I would like to extend my sincere thanks to the Australian Latin American Business Council, DFAT, and the Latin American embassies in Canberra for their contribution to this colloquium throughout the past 15 years. That's a long time. It's clear we share a vision to create positive change in the communities in which we operate and to drive goal-directed, mutually beneficial outcomes in both our regions. Without your enthusiasm, the UQ Latin America Colloquium would not have been possible. I will now hand over to His Excellency, Mr. Armando Vargas Araya, Ambassador of Costa Rica, to give the ambassadorial welcome address. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Professor Romeo Lee, Vice President UQ, Your Excellencies, friends and fellow ambassadors, many coming from coastal or island nations on the other side of the Pacific Ocean, and distinguished participants. Allow me to share our deep regret for the extensive damage caused by Hurricane Ian on its disastrous passage through Cuba. The Cuban brothers affected are in our minds and hearts. Latin America expresses its gratitude for the University of Queensland invitation to this 15th annual edition of our academic, diplomatic, and political colloquium. The University of Queensland and the city of Brisbane are at the forefront of Australia in the practice of effective friendship with the vibrant people here represented by us. This university, State of Queensland, Brisbane, merits all recognition from Latin America. The program of the colloquium and the activities organized around it are of great current pertinence and value. However, maybe on this 15th anniversary of the colloquium, the time has come to take a long, renewed look at the prospects between your nation and ours. Geopolitics evolve rapidly, and we're going through a most problematic juncture and moving towards a new world economic equilibrium. Do we fence sit watching events, get on a defensive attitude, or involve ourselves in creating and changing for a better future? The seminal parliamentary report, Australia's Trade and Investment Relationship with South America, appeared at the turn of the previous century. 11 years ago, the Parliament inquiry into Australia's trade and investment relations with Asia, the Pacific, and Latin America dedicated just one of 9 chapters to a region. In 2014, ANU Press published Australia and Latin America, a collection of essays edited by Professor Carr and Mintz. And 3 years ago, the DFAT White Book included a few minor references to Latin America. And there we are. The population of Latin America and the Caribbean region is similar to the ASEAN group, 655 and 646 million people. Yet in terms of GDP, Latin America is notably higher than total ASEAN GDP. That is $5.73 trillion and $3.17 trillion respectively. The reality is that Latin America represents a market that in a short time will reach 700 million people. A middle class that is projected to exceed 335 million by 2030. Over 430 million social media users. 3 Latin American countries are in the G20, and 4 are members of the OECD, including most recently Costa Rica. 9 are co-members of the Cairns Group of agricultural exporting countries. And by 2040, 18 years from now, 2 of the 7 world largest economies, Brazil and Mexico, will be in our region. Latin America represents a significant opportunity to ensure the risk for Australian interests to be spread more widely and minimize their vulnerability to external pressures by major partners. More than 200 Australian stock exchange companies are already doing business in Latin America. Two-way trade has diversified from its traditional reliance on primary products to our services and manufactured goods. Australian companies hold $8 billion of FDI investment in the region. These factors, together with the unfailingly positive disposition towards Australia, greatly facilitate opening doors and building relationships. At the very beginning of this colloquium, Costa Rica reaffirms its respectful invitation for the University of Queensland, with the support of QALAR, ALABAC, the Latin American Diplomatic Corps, DFAT, and other organizations, to consider the possibility of carrying out a prospective analysis, and a very 21st century at that, an analysis to point towards innovative directions for deepening and widening the development of all positive relations between Latin America and Australia. I wish you in Brisbane a very productive colloquium, and again, many thanks to UQ for your wonderful track record of 15 years on inviting us to participate in this colloquium. And I thank you all for your kind attention.
Thank you, Your Excellency. I would like to invite adjunct Professor Ian Kemish, AM, to present the keynote address. Adjunct Professor Kemish has served as Australian High Commissioner to Papua New Guinea, Ambassador to Germany, Head of the Prime Minister's International Division, and Head of the Consular Service in a diplomatic career that has spanned 25 years. He was awarded membership of the Order of Australia for his leadership of Australia's response to the 2002 Bali bombings. Ian went on to work in the Australian resources sector, guiding the extension of Australian gold mining investment into Latin America and driving the sustainability agenda for Newcrest, a major Australian company. And to top it off, Ian has recently published in July this new book, The Consul, an insider account from Australia's diplomacy frontline, which I'm sure will be of a great read for us, all of us. So welcome, Ian.
Thanks, Carolina. Thank you, Carolina, including for that unexpected promotion for my book. I really appreciate it. Ladies and gentlemen, it's really terrific to be with you. Excellencies, Deputy Vice-Chancellor, students, staff, ladies and gentlemen, it's an honour to be speaking to you on the land of the Turrbal and Jagera people. As a former student of this university, and as someone who proudly carries a number of associations with it today, let me add my own welcome, if I may, to our senior representatives from Latin America. I don't know how familiar you all are, Excellencies, with this university, my alma mater, but among many other things, I recommend you acquaint yourself with the work of UQ International Development, which is making an important contribution increasingly to human development in the Indo-Pacific in collaboration with the Australian government and other donors. I'd also mention, as chair of the Changemakers Board that helps guide this university's alumni engagement strategy, that we're proud to have many current students from Latin America in our midst. I think there's a good representation here today. And indeed to have more than 2,000 alumni of this university living in Latin America. Many happily in prominent positions in leading universities, and with governments and with private partners. With other institutions, my own faculty, if I can call it that way, Humanities and Social Services, is making an important contribution to our people-to-people links across the Pacific through language education and cultural Indigenous collaboration. Now, I've thought a little bit about how I can best be helpful as you step into this important colloquium. In doing so, I think I need to draw a little today on all three different elements of my background, because I am a bit of a hybrid, or at least I can present myself as that. I can draw a bit on my current engagement with the Australian higher education and research sector, on the leadership role I played in the Australian resources sector from 2013 through to 2020, and of course from my former career as an Australian diplomat and ambassador, which Caroline has explained to you already. Thinking of my former diplomatic career, I'm a little relieved that Peter Varghese, who was the Chancellor who was with us over lunch, has not joined us now, because even at this age and experience, I find it slightly difficult to talk about international policy issues in front of my former boss. So we can relax now. Look, the theme of this colloquium asks us to consider how science diplomacy can contribute to cooperation between Australia and its Latin American partners. Or put differently, what research can contribute to the overall relationship. Ambassadors, we tend to talk a lot about relationship in diplomacy, don't we? Indeed, there's a tendency to sometimes talk about a positive bilateral relationship almost as an end in itself. as a key performance indicator in its own right. Now, I suspect I'm not the only one here, I'm sure I'm not, who was schooled in the belief that actually a strong relationship is only important insofar as it provides the means to advance interests. And before I sound all hard-headed, I don't really need to add in this company that interests can be shared, or at the very least mutually reinforcing. We sometimes hear the relationship between Australia and the countries of Latin America characterised as one of unrealised potential, or as one that receives insufficient priority or focus. I heard echoes of that over lunch, and I understand it. These narratives tend to be based on a strictly linear view of the differing relationships that Australia has with each of your countries, measured in the traditional, easily quantifiable way, you know, high-level visits, official consultations, policy dialogue, or perhaps trade and investment statistics. I think we all know that that's actually a very limited way of thinking about relationship. That traditional way of valuing international linkages puts governments at the centre of the action. But a truly mature relationship requires very high levels of participation from industry and the higher education and research sectors, along obviously with good public awareness and support. Certainly in the Australian case, if you think about our more prominent relationships, those things are all true. And let me just acknowledge quickly that it's hard really to speak of a relationship, one single relationship, and it's wrong to speak of one single relationship between Australia and Latin America as a group. The bilateral relationships vary very considerably in terms of their nature, their focus, their orientation. In the end, I think we all understand that governments and their foreign ministries don't own relationships between nations. They serve a role in cultivating and facilitating them. I think we're also accepting a limited perspective on our relationships if we fail to take account of the way nations can come together on common interests on a broader regional or global canvas. Now, I look back to my time as the Australian ambassador in Germany. It was clear to me there that the traditional metrics, including even trade and investment, would largely look after themselves, and that I needed to focus on the common interests we could pursue with my host government. In that case, it might have been the application of emerging technologies in combating climate change, or maintaining political support then for our shared peacekeeping commitments in Afghanistan, or joint collaboration on development projects with the countries of the Pacific between Australia and Germany. That's a different way of thinking about relationship. And I think we all understand that point. I think that we understand that the value of a relationship can lie in the impact that we can have together on the world. That was, after all, the spirit behind the formation of the Cairns group mentioned just now by our Costa Rican colleague, which still brings Australia together with many, perhaps most of the countries represented here today. It's still recognised as one of the most successful and enduring coalitions within the multilateral trade system, even if its liberalisation agenda in agricultural trade is currently struggling to make way against the tide of global events. That spirit also underlies the way several of us come together at the intergovernmental level in economic frameworks such as APEC, CPTPP, and potentially the Pacific Alliance. And look, governments don't understand that only. That spirit's also evident in the university sector in the way that UQ, as Ron Yu has mentioned, has come together with the Sao Paulo State University and the Technical University of Munich to found the Global Bioeconomy Alliance. It'd be great to see that initiative, with its focus on biotechnology and future economies, assume higher profile with our respective governments. Connecting science with public policy and planning the economies of the future, I think, is key to our collective success. So, the way I see it, the best way of thinking about a strong international relationship is one in which governments, industry and the research sector come together in an integrated effort to address the great challenges that we face today as countries, as regions and as a world. The themes suggest themselves pretty quickly. Energy security and climate change come to mind, for example, along with sustainable development, food security, biodiversity restoration and healthcare. I know there's considerable collaboration taking place in these and other important fields between our nations. And I know that the Australian higher education sector is contributing strongly in that sense. We've heard UQ, for its part, is playing an important role in many areas, from health to bioeconomy to sustainable mining. I think, though, personally, that there is still plenty of scope to integrate more closely the efforts of our respective governments, industry partners and research bodies. I feel I'm in a position to have seen the potential here from 3 different angles. I'll talk particularly, though, about my last significant private sector role, where as the Executive General Manager for External Engagement and Sustainability, those were my responsibilities, at Newcrest Mining, Australia's largest gold company, I helped lead a growth strategy that was very clearly focused on expanding beyond our existing platform in Asia, Africa and Australasia to the Americas. We made significant investments in my time in Ecuador, conducted promising exploration activities in many other countries of the region. Some of them are still ongoing, some of them still hopeful. And we buttressed the strategy with some other important market acquisitions in the US and Canada. As you all know, there's a very strong geological continuity that threads through both continents, and geology doesn't stop at the end of Latin America. Let me be clear, let me reflect a little bit about that company's motivation for looking to diversify its global investments. Like many other major mining companies here in Australia, there was a desire to dilute asset concentration in highly complex or risky jurisdictions. Some parts of West Africa, Papua New Guinea, Indonesia, where investors worry a lot about sovereign risk and instability, and to make some investments in more stable environments. We recognised as an organisation that passions can run strong in Latin America, as elsewhere, including here in Australia, about national and public ownership of natural resources, and that there are considerable sensitivities in relation to the impact of mining on environment and biodiversity and on indigenous and traditional lifestyles. But we also judged, having conducted our due diligence and taken careful local advice, that with a strong and clear commitment to sustainability, a reputable Australian company could establish some important and mutually positive partnerships in Latin America. We recognised it was important in all that to have access to the latest research and thinking about sustainable practice in mining, and a thoughtful appreciation of the industrial and social challenges associated with the mineral sector in Latin America. We wanted to be part of the solution, not the problem. Now, of course, consultation and partnership with our host government and local communities were vital, but we also forged a formal partnership, as it turned out, with this university, particularly with the Sustainable Minerals Institute and its International Centre of Excellence in Santiago, which have won recognition across the international mining sector for their work to find solutions to sustainable development and long-term social resilience. This work covers the preservation of natural resources, supporting community development and resilience in mining zones. I really feel that those partnerships supported our staff as they, for the company, established a new presence in the region and began to build a positive local reputation. So there really are good examples of collaboration between the 3 sectors, the official, the commercial and the academic. In all of that we had good support from your embassies and from the governments that you represent. But having lived in all 3 worlds to some extent, I know that that level of cooperation is not always the case. And I do believe that there's plenty more that we can do together. academics don't always think about the practical and industrial application of their research. Many do, but they don't always. Companies don't always stop to think about what they can learn from the research sector. And diplomats, while always supportive, and I speak as a former one myself, sometimes struggle to understand how they can best help and plug their own governments into the dialogue. That, in the end, is why events such as today's colloquium are important, because they provide us with the opportunity to stop, learn, reflect a little about the strength that can flow if we maximise collaboration between our respective sectors, all in the interests, as our Costa Rican colleague indicated, of having an innovative, strong, positive impact together on the world. I wish you all well for the coming discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Ian, for such an stimulating take on that topic. We would like to open the floor for questions. There are going to be two staff with microphones on either side, so please raise your hand and they will come over to you. And those of you who are online today, please use the chat function. So for this Q&A session, Ian is going to be with other UQ representatives as well, so you're going to have the opportunity to have more of an open discussion about it.
Yeah, thank you for that. I am reluctant to project myself as the key Latin American expert in the room, and certainly for the University of Queensland. So I just am wanting to draw on the expertise in the room as this conversation continues. On the other hand, there may be no questions.
Hello, Ian. My name is Gustavo. I'm the secretary of the UQ Latin American Student Association. I just had a question about your diplomatic past. What advice would you give to anyone who's interested in joining the diplomatic service in Australia? And based on the fact that it was 25 years, I would assume that you served under 5 prime ministers in your time.
More than that, I think.
Yep. So my other question was, which of those prime ministers would you say had the best approach towards foreign policy?
Interesting. My diplomatic colleagues here are I know have had similar experiences. We're often asked, aren't we, about the potential for a diplomatic career, and it's a great question. So let me deal with that first. Look, the best advice I can provide is to study what you love and go and live a bit before you seek to enter the Australian Foreign Service. There is no one path. People offer all sorts of different packages to the service. It might be law, languages. It might be humanities. One of the best, I wouldn't say it in front of Peter Varghese, I'd say one of the best secretaries of our department, a guy called Ashton Calvert, was a mathematician. So you can approach it from many different directions. I think, like many foreign services, the Australian Foreign Services values people who do have strong academic qualifications, but also who have some experience in life, and that tends to be the pattern. There's a graduate intake each year. Keep your eye out for the process. Your question about respective prime ministers. I actually mentioned this in my book. First of all, I'd say that nobody who worked with me in government would ever have been able to guess what my personal politics are. I prided myself, as do many of us, in genuinely being an independent public servant and understanding that ultimately you have to believe in democracy, and that when governments change, you work to support the government of the day. So let me be clear about that to begin with. You're asking about prime ministers, and I'm going to take it not at a political level. I'm going to take it at a personal level. I'm going to respond in terms of, you know, and I have worked closely with almost all of them so far. In terms of what they were like to engage with, and the two that were considerate, thoughtful, always courteous, and engaged in a really interested, supportive way were two people you will never put together. Their names were John Howard and Julia Gillard. They had something in common, both from very different ends of the political spectrum. Do not take that as a political comment. I'm not giving you an indicator about support for political approach by either. But at the personal level, it's interesting how people from very different ends of the political spectrum can have that particular quality in common. But look, you know, I happily served governments of both stripes.
Lisa from Regional Development Australia. So I also a private business owner running citrus farms and cattle farms in Queensland. So I ask you a question on behalf of my own business and also on behalf of a group of Queensland farmers. And from diplomatic point of view, from Australian government diplomatic point of view, do you think we should learn some from our Latin American counterparts, how they handle the trade relationship with the trading partners worldwide, such as why their produce can sell to China everywhere, no restriction, versus we have been restricting quite a lot in the past few years. Is there anything from IR point of view, what do you think what we can improve to match up our counterparts so we're not going to be left behind on the global competition?
Well, I'd be happy to have help on this question, ambassadors, but I would say that I'd say a couple of things initially in response. One is that not to underestimate the level of consultation and cooperation that actually happens between Australia and the countries of Latin America in the trade policy field as it stands. We mentioned the Cairns Group, which has been around since the 1980s, very strong focus on seeking liberalisation in agricultural trade. And that, you know, I think maybe half of the Cairns Group is from your countries, something like that, very strong representation. And Australia was also one of the founding partners. So there is a pretty strong level of cooperation, I think. But in terms of, I mean, let's call it out. Your question's about China. And I think.
Not necessarily just China, and Australia having a wide range trading partners globally, and because involving global marketing all the time, I can see we are struggling to competing with all our Southern Hemisphere countries.
Sure.
You know, from Africa and also Latin America. So therefore, I thought, from farmers' point of view, we haven't done anything wrong to be left behind. So I thought there could be some improvement from an IR point of view.
Yeah, no, I do understand your question. Look, I think the short answer is there's plenty of scope for further collaboration in that area, and we can learn from each other. My strong hunch is that as pressures continue to increase on markets, and as we become increasingly challenged to diversify and find new markets, that we will come together with our natural trading allies in Latin America rather than find ourselves working in opposition. There's just such a strongly ingrained pattern of collaboration between Australia and Latin America in precisely this field. So I think it's pretty hopeful and positive.
Thank you, Ian. We have a question that participants share when they register for this event. So considering some of the thoughts that you have shared in your presentation and the discussion, one of the questions is related with, do you think there is any effect of having left-wing governments newly elected in Latin America and how that can impact the partnership. So I know that you were discussing about, as a diplomat, to be able to work with everyone, but we have here a question about, is that going to have any impact in how these diplomatic relationships are conducted between Australia and Latin America?
Anyone want to help? I don't think this has much. I don't think that the political colour of a partner government has any great significant impact on a diplomatic relationship. I really don't think it does. I think that to be choosy about your partners on political grounds, it's certainly not a luxury that a country like Australia can afford. We need as many partners as we can get, and our own government probably would argue that it was on the left-hand side of the political spectrum right now anyway. Everything's relative, but no, I don't think that really features much at all in working together on common interests.
Thank you. Any other question from our audience? Yes, we have a question over there.
Hi, I'm Jose. I'm an international student from Latin America, from Ecuador, and we actually met a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
I'm the founder of Tutoria, and I just had a question in terms of your experience in Ecuador. What were the biggest challenges that you experienced, or Newcrest experienced, when they were developing all these projects of mining explorations in Ecuador, when we were in the transition from the old government to the current government that we have? And what was the role of education, innovation, and entrepreneurship on those aspects?
Newcrest, thank you. Newcrest became interested in Ecuador a little after the political changes in Ecuador, so it wasn't prior. I'm not sure how much of a cause and effect there was in that timing. I think it was probably more about the geology, the focus, where the company was up to. I think there was also a sense that things were opening up a little in Ecuador at the time. And there was a very strong sense of partnership. You ask about challenges. Look, I don't think there were any unforeseen challenges, and some of the considerations and themes that we found ourselves dealing with were not unfamiliar from other jurisdictions. I mentioned some of them briefly in a broad way when I was speaking earlier. That strong passion by communities about ownership of natural resources, that strong concern about the impact of mining activity on indigenous life and on the environment and biodiversity. These are themes that there are more qualified people in the room than me to speak about, but they were issues we understood. And what I was trying to say earlier is that it actually, we needed help to understand, scope and step into that. And we also needed to, I think, be the company we were, which was a company that actually genuinely was committed to a sustainable approach. A lot of companies say that they're committed to sustainability, but you've got to test that. And I feel no concern about saying that Newcrest's one that actually passes the test. But so I think those were the issues, and I think that the partnerships that we've been able to establish so far, I still say we because I should declare I still have an advisory role with Newcrest. I haven't completely cut away from them. Are beneficial, are very positive for the organisation.
Thank you.
If there is no other question in the audience, I would like to say thank you, Ian. We really appreciate your time today For everyone with any additional questions that you would like to ask, you are going to have the time to ask them later in the afternoon tea today. And now I would like to introduce our moderator for our next panel discussion, Professor Rick Valenta. So please come to the stage.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks, Caroline.
I guess I'm supposed to sit at one of these chairs, am I? Is that the plan, or should I? I'll start at the podium, then I'll move to a chair. Excellencies, Adjunct Professor Kemish, Deputy Vice Chancellor, and guests, I too would like to acknowledge the Jagera and Turrbal people as traditional owners and their custodianship of the lands in which we meet today, and pay my respect to their ancestors and their descendants. And thank you very much, Carolina. First of all, I'd really like to welcome everyone to the first panel session, which we're focusing on science diplomacy, perspectives from Australia and Latin America. This is a topic that's really dear to my heart, having spent over 20 years leading innovation activities in both business and academic roles in 6 different Latin American countries, including several very fulfilling years living in Mexico. The topic's also of interest to me because UQ's SMI Ice Chile Center of Excellence, which has already been mentioned, is now in its 9th year of operation and has become embedded in the industry and academic landscape of the Latin American minerals industry. And as a leader of that group, I'm really looking forward to the perspectives of our panel and the audience on this important issue. So it's now my pleasure to introduce the panel for this first session. And I'll just go through them, and as I introduce you, it'd be great if you could come up and have a seat. So I'll start with Steph Gorecki-Natic. She's the General Manager, International and Astronomy Branch in the Science and Commercialization Division at the Department of Industry, Science and Resources. Welcome, Steph. Stephanie joined the department in November 2020. In her role as General Manager, she's responsible for advancing Australia's international science engagement through bilateral agreements and multilateral settings. And she's also responsible for policies that support access to state-of-the-art astronomy facilities, such as the Square Kilometre Array and the European Southern Observatory, enabling Australian astronomers to undertake world-class science. Prior to joining DISER, Stephanie was a senior economic analyst at the Office of National Intelligence, and prior to this, worked at the Commonwealth Treasury in a range of roles in the department's fiscal, markets, and macroeconomic groups. She has a Bachelor in Applied Finance with a Bachelor of Economics Honours from Macquarie University. So welcome.
Thanks, Rick.
Our next panelist is Alison Dell, who is the Assistant Secretary, International Partnerships at the Department of Education. She has responsibility for Australia's education-related participation in multilateral fora and bilateral engagement with key partner countries in Southeast Asia, Latin America, and the Pacific, Africa, and the Middle East. What does that leave? I don't think there's much of the world left there. This includes cooperation with other countries and supporting Australian providers seeking to develop education and research partnerships offshore. Alison has extensive experience across the Australian public service, having worked for over 20 years in key policy roles on high-profile and complex initiatives. Formerly, she worked in energy policy and supply chains. She has a passion for collaborative approaches and driving excellent relations in international education. So welcome, Alison. And our final panelist is Mauricio Murillo, who is the Deputy CEO of the FIBO Group, whose vision is to collect waste from natural crops, food factories, and supply chains to create raw materials utilizing new technologies and innovations that can be converted into byproducts. Mauricio is an experienced CEO with a demonstrated history of working in the environmental services industry. He has a background in innovation management, operations management, life sciences, strategic planning, and science. He has a master's degree focused in biotechnology management and innovation from UQ, and is currently a PhD research student studying biocomposites at USQ. So welcome, Mauricio. So this panel, as you've heard already, is going to focus on the critical role of science diplomacy to enhance knowledge leadership and economic competitiveness, and to lift our profile as partners for science capacity building, research, collaboration, and international exchange. It aims to identify the key criteria for successful international collaborations and to explore Latin America's development priorities. We'll start the panel session by asking each of our panelists to spend a few minutes sharing their perspectives on the theme Science Diplomacy, Perspectives from Australia and Latin America. And after that, we'll ask the audience for any questions they might have in response to those statements. Please remember as well that we'll be using a Padlet in this session, as Caroline has already mentioned, to capture feedback from the live and online audience. And I'll be keeping an eye out on my iPad for any comments or questions as they come in. And if you haven't noticed, I think most of you should have the invitation in front of you, and that's got a QR code that will allow you to connect up to the Padlet. But if you go to padlet.com, Global Partnerships, all one word, /LAC, you'll find it there as well. So now we'll get going on the initial statements around the theme. Where was Science Diplomacy, Perspectives from Australia and Latin America. I wanted to get that right. Starting with Steph. Over to you. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Rick. Can I just firstly associate myself with the acknowledgement of country and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging of the lands on which we're meeting today, and extend that respect to any Indigenous and Torres Strait Islander people joining us today. So also excuse my use of notes. I've just returned from a week in the UK, so half my brain is still in transit. So I need my sort of safety net here. I will say also just a bit of a caveat that in my remarks today, I'll use the term international engagement and science diplomacy interchangeably, although I do appreciate they are slightly different, but I think I can get away with it today. I want to start by saying that science diplomacy is fundamentally important to Australia. And I'll use a framing that the Minister for Industry and Science, the Honourable Ed Husic, and Australia's Chief Scientist, Dr. Cathy Foley, uses quite a lot when they talk about international engagement and science diplomacy. And that's Australia represents 0.3% of the world's population, and we produce 4% of its science. So that's wonderful. That speaks to our talent, our expertise, our success, how we're regarded, why people want to come and work with Australia. That also says that there's 96% out there that we need to be working with international partners in order to access. And science, I probably don't need to tell this audience, but science is an inherently collaborative discipline. And that's because it's about coming together to solve common problems. It's about using different perspectives, multidisciplinary approaches, working cross streams. It's about leveraging expertise, experience, equipment, know-how and knowledge from all sorts of sources to come together to solve those common problems. And that sort of translates seamlessly at the international level, because for many, many reasons, but two that jump to mind, common problems these days are increasingly global problems. And then, of course, when you open up your collaborations to the world, that just exponentially increases the pool of talent and know-how and expertise, as I mentioned, that you can tap into. But that can be challenging. It's a big world. How do you navigate that? And that's where sort of government can come in. And, being the government person, I do have to talk from a government perspective. And government can open doors. It can use that government to link, to facilitate access, to provide support through things like funding mechanisms. But even then, government can't do it all. So you need some sort of guiding principle, if nothing else, to manage expectations both internally and externally about what you can actually do. At the Australian federal government level, we don't actually have a clearly articulated formal science diplomacy strategy. So what we actually do is use a principles-based approach. And what that means is effectively we pursue international engagements that are in the national interest. And I fully appreciate that the national interest is not clear most of the time and probably not defined as well as it should be. But I'll point to two things that are helping in that regard. And the first one is the Global Science and Technology Diplomacy Fund. And this is a relatively new initiative. It was announced in the May budget last year, and we're in the final stages of establishing this fund. And what it will do is it will focus on strategic and targeted engagements that we want to pursue internationally in identified priority areas with key partners. Those priority areas were announced in April this year, and they are advanced manufacturing, AI and quantum, hydrogen production, and RNA, including mRNA vaccines and therapies. And so that's a clear, obvious statement from government about the things that we think are in the national interest to pursue through international partnerships. The other thing I'll point to is just yesterday, the Minister for Industry and Science announced the review of Australia's science priorities. So this will be a 12-month review headed up by Dr. Cathy Foley. I'm not going to preempt any outcomes from that review, but that clearly goes to articulating what's important to us as a country that we want to pursue, that we want to put government effort behind. So watch that space and look out for that. The Global Fund, as I said, is about strategic and targeted engagements, and you can do that if you have a solid bedrock of international relationships. And science diplomacy is about sustained relationships. And Australia may not be known to many people, but we have 134 science and technology arrangements with about 60 or over 60 partner countries. And that comes with a whole sort of system of architecture, if you like, and bilateral dialogues and exchanges and things like that. But fundamentally, it's about using that government-to-government link to connect researchers to researchers, to raise awareness about developments in both countries, Australia and the partner that we're meeting with, and also what opportunities there might be for collaboration. And of course, it also goes towards delivering our broader foreign policy agenda. If I just take a moment, I'm probably over time, Rick, but I'll just take a moment to sort of touch on how we look at the Latin America relationship through that science lens. And I would say we would characterise it as a relationship of growth, but probably not one that's mature, although there is potential for that to change. The reason I say it's not mature, I think it's about that you don't know what you don't know, and we're still in the stages of understanding the strengths and areas where we can complement in terms of partnerships. And that's where the people-to-people links come in, and I won't say too much, I know Alison's going to touch on that, but those people-to-people links, there's occasions like this to come together to raise that awareness, to keep enhancing that understanding. But I'll touch on a few areas that back up the reason I say there's potential for this relationship to change, to mature. If I start with just Brazil, the Global Fund that I've mentioned, Brazil's been identified as a priority partner in the RNA theme. Also, later this year, we're very pleased to be hosting the inaugural Science and Technology Dialogue with Brazil following their ratification of our Science and Tech Treaty last year. As I say, this will take place in December in Sydney, and we're very much looking forward to welcoming the delegation. That's our first formal government-to-government meeting, which is pretty exciting. But more broadly, there's also a lot of touch points through multilateral fora where we engage. So there's APEC, and also the new G20 Research and Innovation Initiative gathering that's been stood up under Indonesia's presidency. In astronomy and astrophysics, the other part of my responsibilities, there's lots of engagement there, predominantly through Australia's strategic partnership with the European Southern Observatory and accessing their world-leading optical telescopes located in Chile. But that leads to a broader relationship with various countries as it relates to accessing science and research infrastructure. I'll leave it there in the interest of time, but my point is I've just skimmed the surface of the touch points in terms of our science relationships, and I know Alison will touch on that again. My point is the opportunities are there, and there's a lot going on, but it probably sits beneath the surface a bit. And so this will require a collective effort from not just government, but everyone, if we do really want that relationship to mature and sort of elevate. So thanks, Rick. I'll just leave it there.
All right. Thanks very much. Okay, now we might pass on to Alison for your remarks.
Thanks, Rick. Excuse me for clearing my throat, everyone. I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands upon which we're meeting today and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. I actually feel like a little bit like Kylie Minogue, I'm sorry, but I promise I won't sing, so that'll cheer you all up no end. Look, at the risk of repeating a lot of what Steph said, because, we are both from government, so different agencies, slightly different emphasis, but I'll just touch on a couple of points about my work. So in my patch, I have actually covered the entirety of the education system from early childhood to higher ed and research. So my work is sort of much broader than Steph's, but it comes and dovetails together where we come together with this research initiative. And I think I'm just reflecting on what a lot of what Ian said earlier and obviously what Steph's just alluded to in terms of why we support international engagement in research and why we do this. And I, at my heart, am collaborative and want to promote those people-to-people links, and I fully believe that that's where the relationships are and where we can most benefit, because the problems are global. And, you know, it's not about viewing a relationship as mutually reinforcing, it's about viewing that relationship as solving something that's bigger than both parties, I feel. And again, at the risk of repeating what Steph's already said, we do a lot of engagement with our Latin American partners through APEC and other alliances like that as well. So, I mean, our sort of priorities in the international engagement sphere, I've touched on that people-to-people, skills formation, social cohesion, but we've got a lot of kind of little projects bubbling under the surface. For example, we already have a memorandum of understanding with Brazil's National Council for State Funding Agencies. I think it's called CONFAPI, and we've had some conferences on those under that umbrella recently. And if I touch on the topics, COVID, oceans and food security. So clearly these are not problems that are relevant to one particular nation, but obviously they are global problems. We also we have a Tropical Research Water Alliance, research alliance with Brazil, and that's just two of the ways in which I've touched the surface on that. I probably will leave it there. Thanks for the introduction as well. There is a lot of countries that I don't cover, India and China in particular, so there's a fair bit of our global engagement that isn't in my patch. But thanks very much, Rick, and it's really nice to be here. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Alison. And finally, Mauricio, be interested to hear your thoughts on the same topic.
Thank you very much. First of all, I recognize the traditional owners of this land. I respect the past and present people. My point of view is a little bit different from the government. Obviously, there is an agenda, and the agenda is preset. The reality is different. In Latin America, we have different problems with different background, and as you mentioned, there is a lot of immaturity in the relationships and what is needed. I will focus more into probably what we have to focus is sustainability and water resources and waste management. Mainly because South America is a big producer, is the dispensive, the storage from mainly all the European and majority of the United States products. I would say that as priority in the minerals, as was previously mentioned, we need to focus in the sustainability of the water resources and engage in research, especially checking all these waste waters to be used in agricultural use or thrown into the rivers and kill all this fauna. I will say the food scarcity, which is a priority as well. We waste a lot of our products in Australia, and we have the capacity to do the research through university and engage with a lot of the Latin American universities in research and transferring new technologies to use that knowledge that we have here and the capacity and the strength and all the ability to be transferred, and will be not just the 4%, but maybe the 20% of the transferring into Latin American. People will be engaging in Latin America as well, because they will see Australia as an example. Actually, Latin American see Australia as a clean country, which I think it is clean, but needs a little bit more refinement. But still we can pursue a lot of research in those areas. My main point will be competitive in the technology that Australia can export, and the technology has been developing in all these Latin American countries, especially for water resources, waste management, and circular economies, and all this stuff that is very trendy and is more relevant for us in Latin America than I mean, of course, vaccines are important, and all these stuff are important. Minerals already, they have developed things, but I think the problem is it's no rain. It's a drought, and we throw in a lot of the produce because we don't use it. In Latin America and in Australia, and we can use it. We have a company called FIBO, and we started a company, and we have been using some of the ways and creating that technology. I will leave my remarks here, and I think maybe we can engage with that conversation.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
So after those opening remarks, what I'd like to do now, I'm keeping an eye on the Padlet. Nothing's come through on there, but before we move on to any other discussion topics, I'd like to throw it open to the audience to see if you have any questions to our panelists arising from their initial presentations. Yes, we have a question over here.
Hi, thank you very much. My name is Lucy. I'm a lecturer in biotechnology at SCMB. And my question is regarding, it's for you, sorry, the first panelist, I forgot your name. Sorry. Thank you. My question was for you. It's regarding what characteristics or parameters from the countries are used to decide which country is going to have a priority for an international engagement?
Sure, thanks for the question. I can talk about how we've done it specifically for the Global Fund, because I think that's quite a great sort of case study, if you like. So the way we approached that was really to look at the priority themes first, so to be sort of national interest led, if you like. So once we identified those themes I've mentioned, then we looked at the data to see, okay, well, who are the world leaders in those themes? But then also, who is Australia already doing a lot with out of those leaders, and who are we maybe underdone? And then we sort of thought, okay, well, let's focus on the ones that we can really leverage where the gap is. But then we also looked at, of those countries, who's got the capacity to do more with us. And that's not always a given that you want to work with another country and they're equally as willing and able to do so. So that's how we sort of landed on those countries. And it's all, if you Google it, it's online, it's on the department's website, who the sort of priority countries are. And I think some of them might be a little bit surprising. So for example, in advanced manufacturing, you won't see Germany because there's so much happening there already. And so we look to sort of fill that gap analysis and really leverage. And it sort of goes to that role of government is not to duplicate what's already out there. It's not to try to replace the private sector. It's to sort of fill that gap and sort of be that more facilitator, supporter role, not necessarily to try to jump in there and do the doing ourselves.
Do we have any other questions from the audience? So we did have some questions submitted by the audience early on that I might pass to, and I might send the first one Alison's way, and that was one of the questions was relating more specifically to Colombia. What's Australia's involvement in Colombia in R&D and education? How does it fit into the scenario?
So again, one of the thank you for the question. We have a very emerging relationship with Colombia, and it's still at an early stage, but there's a number of projects that we run both multilaterally and bilaterally that we are progressing, both in key areas, things like mining and tourism, and also micro-credentials. So I think with the shift, obviously, on COVID, we've all been forced to live our lives in the virtual space. I know there's obviously a number of you who are very well versed in this. I also had to do my primary school years again with my children online, which was not very fun, I have to tell you. But I think there's so much opportunity, whatever topic it is, to upskill and reskill in micro-credentials, and I think that's a really key area in which, for all our priority markets, we'll start looking at.
Great, thank you very much. Do we have any other questions from the audience? Yes, we have one over here.
Hello, good afternoon. I'm Anthony Hallog.
I'm a lecturer in industrial ecology and circular economy. My question is, what government policies and corporate strategies that we can further develop to enhance more collaboration in circular economy, in hydrogen production, as well as advanced manufacturing?
Who wants to take that one? Do you want that one, Steph? Yeah. We're getting out of order here, but I'll hit you after this, Mauricio.
Yeah, so I think the question was what programs are out there to support those sort of industries or sectors that you mentioned. Is that right?
A need for more policies and strategies, yeah.
Oh, look, I think, is there a need? It's probably an insatiable desire to have more from government to support everything. So I guess that the challenge for us is, resources are scarce and we have to sort of, figure where to put that effort. So I'm not going to sort of say, no, government's done, everything it needs to do, etc. But there is that limit to what government can do, and that's where the private sector involvement and that kind of, also from institutions and that drive to do things where government can come in is that facilitative level. So if we sort of hear that there are challenges in collaborating with certain countries, we can try to use our links and connections there. In terms of programs to support the sort of themes that you mentioned, hydrogen production, advanced manufacturing has been identified as priority themes of the Global Fund that I've mentioned a few times. In terms of, was it plastics you mentioned? Sorry.
The other one is the circular economy, so plastic would be in there too. Yeah.
So that's another part of my department that does look after that, and so it's certainly a policy government's interested in and looking at. I couldn't tell you top of my head if there's a specific program to support international collaboration in that, but I suppose it comes down to how things are defined as well and the sort of the parameters around certain funding opportunities. I can say through the Global Fund we've kept it quite broad, so advanced manufacturing could cover a range of things. AI, what is AI? It's quite broad, so we sort of try to get maximum flexibility through that. I think, again, it's easy for government to say, but a lot of this has to be sort of privately led, and government in my opinion, government shouldn't be the driver of these sorts of things because we're not necessarily best placed to know how to push and drive things, but we're good at, as I've said a few times now, facilitating and helping where we need to, where it can't be done by others. So that's probably a very unsatisfactory answer to your question, but I'm happy maybe to chat to you at the break as well.
Thank you.
Oh, we have a question up here in the middle.
Good afternoon. I'm Leslie Dominguez. I'm currently a PhD student from the UQ Diamantina Institute. And my question is perhaps directed to Steph and Alison. So just sharing a little bit of my story, I did my undergraduate here in Australia. I did a Bachelor of Biomedical Science. And my education here was allowed by a scholarship that I got from the Ecuadorian government in 2014. Now, the reason I wanted to ask this question is because after I graduated, I decided to pursue an academic career. So that's why I decided to do a PhD. And there is a lot of students that were included in that program that came to Australia to do studies related to the biological field. But considering our current situation back in Ecuador, science is not really big and powerful in our country, and I know that there is not a lot of support for people with academic careers. So I was wondering whether things like this might be considered when you are looking at the priorities that you consider to establish these partnerships with countries in Latin America. So basically what I'm trying to get at is the fact that a lot of students from Ecuador came to do careers in the biomedical field would also contribute in a way for you guys here in Australia to consider Ecuador, for example, as a country with which you can establish a sort of a program in which students that are in my position can work to contribute to both Ecuador and Australia as well. If there are policies maybe in place or ideas that you guys have that can contribute to that. Thank you.
Alison, do you want to get...
Sure, I'll take that. And again, I'm probably not going to give you a really fantastic answer, more to the fact that I will probably just reiterate what Steph said. So when the government is, or when government agencies are assessing the opportunities for collaboration with the countries that we are looking at, we take a whole range of factors into account. And particular from my experience just recently, I've just joined the department, but the thing that is happening in our region right here, right now, is Australia's focus on Southeast Asia and the Pacific. So what I'm getting at there are other things other than research and academic links that drive our countries where we engage. So the broadest geostrategic issues that are in our region and Australia's relationship with our region, that is a key driver. That's not to say that Ecuador doesn't or won't feature, but it's more about balancing all those factors in a big pie, if you like, about where we're choosing to focus our efforts. However, in terms of academic scholarships and research exchange and things like that, those are also managed by our absolutely delightful colleagues at the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, with whom I work very closely. So I'm happy to take a further discussion with you on notice and get back to you about that if you like. But with respect to the themes, certainly, biomedical science is clearly a key priority. So, definitely I can have a chat to you later if you like.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I might go to a question. I'll keep thinking of questions in the audience. That's great to hear so many questions. But I wanted to ask you a question, Mauricio, from a business perspective. What international opportunities are presenting themselves to Australian business entrepreneurs and researchers, and how can they commercialize cutting-edge products and innovation to strengthen scientific collaborations?
That's an excellent question. All right. Very complex, but majority of small business in around Latin America are looking for innovation, and they're looking also for some research to back up the technologies or maybe their products or whatever. And I think the opportunity will be mainly for the people that have been studying in Australia, or international students that can engage in some projects related with maybe tropical produce, that sort of thing, or water resources. Topics like energy efficiency, basically water management, small business related with the food production channels, byproducts. A lot of byproducts can be engaged in the opportunity. Australia is a country is open to try different products from all around the world, and I think the opportunity to engage with researchers in Latin America and in Australia is very open. Government is trying to do their best, but I will say is more into private sector, as you mentioned. And the ambassadors will be able to pass it on to governments and explain that basically there is an opportunity to engage with that sort of new ventures, especially for a small business, I will say so. Now, big business already competing with a lot of the people from Asia, China, Asia, that sort of thing, and it's very hard to compete in Australian arenas. I will say if you have innovation and if you have an excellent product, the opportunity in Australia is massive. I developed one of my coffee byproducts, and the coffee byproducts was taken by my daughter. She created a company called Ungrounded, She was the winner of the most younger entrepreneurship in Australia this year. She was awarded $100,000, and now she is generating income. She's going to get into bourbons just from the waste from coffee. I mean, it's just the desire to develop and commit and engage. Doesn't need to be something very, very big, but start with something. Yeah.
Great. Thank you. Vice?
I have a question from the chat.
Okay. Is this the same or a different chat? Okay.
Online, yeah. So we have a question from someone who is joining us today online. So Joanna Ochoa her comment is, hello, Rick. Nice to see you again, and all the panelists and assistants. This is Joanna Ochoa from the University of Azuay in Ecuador. My question is, what aspects you think needs to be reinforced in order to have more collaborations for research between Ecuador and Australia? Can our volatile economy be a negative factor for this collaboration?
So, who are we going to get to answer that question? Steph.
I'll have a crack. Okay, so I mean, I guess in any international partnership, there are inherent challenges, and that goes without saying, no matter who that partner is. And I come back to what I sort of said about how Australia approaches our international engagements, and that's through a national interest lens. So I guess that's a driving force. I mean, there are probably some circumstances, no doubt, that you do science diplomacy for diplomacy's sake, but more often than not, you're doing that because there's something you want out of that. So the first challenge is kind of aligning those interests. It's not necessarily an insurmountable challenge or the greatest challenge you'll ever face, but it's about finding where those sort of interests align and then pursuing that. As I sort of mentioned, science diplomacy is also about that sustained relationship. Ideally, it's not a one-off. It shouldn't be just a one-off you do because you want something out of it. Then thank you very much, move on, forget about it. It's about those sustained links through time. When you add sort of funding profiles to that, budget cycles to that, economic volatility is not your best friend because you want to be able to sort of guarantee multi-year funding programs, et cetera, where you can. And obviously, I mean, Australia goes through its ups and downs economically speaking. And, all governments sort of face those challenges, but if it is particularly more volatile, it does sort of create further challenges. The other challenge is more just about, as I sort of said, that awareness, like what actually are the strengths, where can we actually complement each other and work together? And that's an ongoing sort of a thing, and particularly where, at the government level is one aspect to that, and we may not have full visibility, and I'm certainly not going to claim to have full visibility. Maybe my team will kill me for saying that, but it is always a work in progress, no matter what the partner is, about where their strengths are. Each country will do their run their domestic programs to enhance their capabilities in certain areas, and other side of the world, you're not always abreast of that and aware of that. So that's why the sort of more regular dialogues are so important. The other thing I'll say, again, it's not always up to government. So a lot of the initiatives and a lot of the relationship starts at the very ground root level between a researcher who went to a conference and met another researcher, and from there good things grew. And that's sometimes how it gets to government as well. And so again, it made me sound like a broken record, but it comes in at many levels, and government's one level, but it's certainly not the be-all and end-all. And we do sort of need all those sorts of parts working, we as a sort of collective way, in order for the relationships to keep growing and flourishing.
Great, thanks. As you were answering that question, I was thinking, when did I last see Joanna? 2018. So isn't it wonderful that we can have a Zoom meeting and somebody dialing in from Ecuador who you've previously worked with? So it's great to be able to do that. And while we're sort of shouting out to various people, I wanted to also pass on a comment from Christina from the Brazilian Embassy, saying that she would like to thank Steph and Allison for their comments regarding the MOU on CONFAP, then the DESI and the agreement on science and technology with Brazil. They're very excited with these developments, looking forward to the first meeting of the Committee on Science and Technology in December. So another connection from overseas. And then now we have a question here. So do we have a microphone down the front? for Jaime? Well, just wait, we've got a microphone coming here so that the online audience can hear you.
The question is for you, Steph. I heard you talk about the agreement you have with the European Southern Observatory, that you know they have a lot of capacity in Chile. And I missed to hear the collaboration Australia have with Chile in physics and astronomy. I understand we have a huge collaboration on that. Do you have any information about the collaboration we have, Chile and Australia, in astronomy and physics?
Sure. I think, firstly, can I confirm or deny it exists? Yes, it's there. I will say it's mainly done through our colleagues at CSIRO, and we've got Alex Cook sitting directly behind you who can probably speak to that more than I can. So that's at the more sort of, I don't know how to describe exactly, the actual doing the science frontier and sort of where the benefits of having CSIRO, and they certainly do have a presence in Chile. We have a councillor in Santiago, and that's where sort of that relationship is probably strongest. I know that's probably not a satisfactory answer for you once again, but happy to continue the conversation.
I met Brian Schmidt in Chile. He worked together with my friend Mario Muy. Mm-hmm. He won the Nobel Prize.
He sure did.
He worked with the team in Chile.
Yep.
So, well, maybe CSIRO can tell us a little bit better.
Not at the moment, no. Just to confirm that happened indeed. Oh, yes. Brian is a good friend of Chile, that's for sure. Yeah.
We have another question.
Yes, thank you. I'm from Argentina, and I just wanted to know if there's anything that you can comment regarding either ongoing or projected cooperation specifically with Argentina. Is there anything that you could comment on that?
I guess that's directed at me again. We might throw to Alison as well for support. I guess from our perspective, Argentina has not been identified as a priority partner for the Global Fund. And I think that's because, by definition, not everybody can be a priority partner. But I will say that the partners, the intent is to review those annually to make sure that we're sort of targeting things in the right way. Beyond that, I'm not aware of any sort of specific engagements with Argentina at the government-to-government level. Again, I would stress that there's a whole world out there that government's not necessarily a part of in terms of institution-to-institution, business-to-business links as well, as it pertains to sort of science and research and development. But at the sort of more official level, I'm not aware of a great deal of activity as yet, although obviously the Antarctic programs that Australia has with various countries, Argentina would be part of that, not my direct area. And again, I sort of don't want to sort of assume to be the expert in all things science and government. We are sort of a little bit fragmented, and when it comes to those specific programs, it does vary. So, for example, there might be some agriculture links as well I'm just not aware of. Apologies, but I don't know, Alison, if you want to add to that.
I can add a little bit. And I actually did do myself up a cheat sheet with a bunch of countries with a whole lot of things in it, and I left it in my bag. So I'll have to come back to it. I'm not doing very well today, am I? But we've got a number of projects. We have a thing called the International Education Innovation Fund, or it might be the Innovation Education International Fund. I can never remember. And we've got a number of projects that we're running under that. And they are, again, as good government people are saying, they are mutually reinforcing areas of interest. So things like mining in Latin America and sort of skills, occupations and tourism and things like that. So we've got a bunch of those sort of on the go, not just specific to Argentina though as well.
So I have a question. While you're talking, Alison, I have another one for you, which is I think quite timely, given the fact that it sounds like our national science and innovation agenda is about to be reviewed and possibly changed. And that is, how can universities and industry partner to support, complement, and give feedback to the Australian government's strategic direction with regard to international science and education?
Yeah, thanks. Great question. So I think, again, we sort of go back to the remarks and the themes that we've been touching on since the start of this discussion this afternoon, which has been incredibly valuable and really complex. So I'd just like to say thanks to my panellists and thanks for everyone here again, because it's been really fun. And so I think it's mutually reinforcing. So the government can be the facilitator, the door opener. We can help through our counsellor network, through government-to-government engagement by sort of assisting with regulatory barriers and things like that, and providing seed funding for opportunities for things to start together. So, for example, there are concrete ways that has happened. The Centre of Internationalisation of Education Brazil Australia was actually developed from a COLA grant with Australian university partners, and that's been developed by a Brazilian student and now sort of keeps on going. But I think the government is the facilitator and the enabler, and we can provide those doors and those passages, and then it's open to sort of universities and business to pick their areas of commonality and research and make those connections. You know, like, it's really important. I mean, research is such a long-term, complex thing, and I guess in the topics that people are researching, that they're dynamic and they change over time. So it's really important to spend those times developing the partnerships and the in-country knowledge to maximise those things. I'll just do a little plug for our counsellor network. So the Department of Education has counsellors in Mexico and Brazil. So I'll just put that out there. Thank you very much.
We've got some more questions that were previously submitted by the audience, and I got one for you, Mauricio. That is, what's the approach that Australian universities are taking to agriculture waste at present?
There is a little bit of confusion with what is recycling, upcycling, littering, and the definitions are not clear in terms of people talk about recycling agricultural waste, and it's not recycling because it hasn't been used. I will say it is more into processing the agricultural waste. And when you say recycling, it's more about recycling some organic or some plastic or some metals or some materials that had been used previously, and there is an outcome. Maybe you can reuse 10%, 20%. Majority of the plastic, as you know, is burned. And doesn't matter if you go to the deposit and they give you 10 cents or 20 cents, they're going to burn it anyhow. Because it's polluted. And they cannot recycle 100%. Only 10% of what you think is recyclable is recyclable. There is a little bit of a stigma there. Like people believe, and they try to do their best, they try to put in the right bin. And this is what we are a little bit of brainwashing. While agricultural waste could be double the amount of plastic, and we don't even look at the agricultural waste. We waste 70, 80, 90% because the pineapple is not ripe enough, or the orange is not good enough, it's not round enough, or doesn't matter, or the supermarket said, no, this is not. Then there are new initiatives like a Second Bite, and they start with the recovering the waste from the crops, but the waste from the plants is that makes more trouble. It's not because it's sitting there for 5 months waiting to decompose. It's because farmers, they need to use lots of chemicals to break all these materials and to start again. And they need to pass the tractor 200 hours, and they have to spend a lot of oil and petrol and waste material, and they lose a lot of money. And they lose money because they have to do it anyhow. If we can think about the use of the waste in terms of taking the fibers, taking the cellulose, taking the byproducts, creating composting materials, and engage universities, the farmers will use the land within 2 months or 1 month, and we can produce double the crops. And the problem is that there is confusion in definitions. I will say the role of universities are very important from now on. I hope this colloquium will put some ideas or researchers, or if anybody here wants to engage with us in an internship and work with us with different projects in Latin America, we are more than welcome you, and I'm happy to link with you guys, and we can ask for support from the UQ. As you say, it's not all about the government. I'm sure government will match whatever money we can create of university. Normally they match $50,000 with $50,000 from university and $50,000 from government. It's $150,000, and they keep going, and there will be solutions. Yep.
Thank you very much. Now, so we're still getting questions in the Padlet, and it's still open. So please ask some more. But it's great to see that they're coming through. And I'll keep an eye out for questions in the audience. But here's a couple of quick ones. First one for you, Steph. And this is a very academic-focused one. Co-publication with LATAM is growing at 15% per annum. That's quite exciting, I think, in science. What would a more mature relationship between Australia and Latin America look like for science?
Oh, good question. So definitely right, the co-publications are growing, and I think that sort of rate of growth is similar to what we experienced with our relationship with China and India not so long ago. So that's really a sign of strength, and I think the citation impact of that as well shows that the quality is being upheld as well, which my team tells me is not always the case when you have a sort of a period of rapid growth. What would it take to be mature? I think that's a multifaceted sort of response to that. Well, what you'd expect to see in order to sort of they classify it as a mature relationship, and co-publications would be one. But I think it's about one way to sort of distill it down, I suppose, is when you think about who's a key partner in a particular topic, particular area, whatever it might be. It's who comes to mind, more broadly speaking, whether it's from government, industry, students, the broader community. And I think given Australia's sort of historical growth and ties, it's more sort of European partners, the United States, and countries more in the region, as in Southeast Asia region. Latin and South America, it's an area where, for better or worse, it just sort of doesn't pop out front of mind to decision makers, to the broader community as an area, a set of partners that we really should sort of go to first. And I think when we think about mature relationships, it's sort of that, but it's also about that sort of sustained element to it. I'm not trying to suggest we haven't been working together for a very long period of time. That clearly is the case. It's about elevating that, and I know that's a flimsy answer because there is no sort of nice, neat way to capture, maturity equals X, Y, and Z. But I think it's sort of a few of those aspects put together. If nothing else, you sort of think about, okay, well, what are our mature relationships? What do they look like? And then sort of compare and contrast.
Great, thanks. Yes, please, yeah.
I'll just add to that as well. I mean, as Steph said, it's multifaceted. There's a number of ways you can look at it, but we also need to consider we're not just talking about bilateral efforts here. So we also have to think about the multilateral fora in which we engage. So we've got obviously the G20, and we've got APEC, and we've got the Indo-Pacific framework, and there's endless alphabet soup of acronyms that are being developed in different stages and ages. But I think the measure of a country's sort of bilateral strength of engagement is not only just on that bilateral thing and not only on purely numerical indicators. I think it's something that Ian referred to earlier, but also the kind of relationships that you develop in the multilateral fora. So I think that's just another way to look at it.
Actually, I was going to stay with you, Alison, on the next question, which is how should Australia, this is another one coming from the Padlet, how should Australia address their skill immigration policy, I think it's an immigration policy is what they mean here, without affecting the development of Latin American countries? How do we keep the balance between people coming here to study and deciding not to go home? This was a topic at lunch as well in our at our table.
Okay, so I'm going to sort of use a get out of jail free card on this one right at the outset. I will attempt to answer it, but don't hold me to it. So some of you may know that the Department of Education is now the Department of Education. It was previously the Department of Education Skills and Employment, and all the skills people that used to work with us are now our esteemed colleagues at the Department of Education, multi-slip, Employment and Workplace Relations. However, there is a lot of work going on in our department, obviously, with the Department of Home Affairs, our colleagues at DFAT and our colleagues at DUA on things like post-study work rights, upskilling, multi-skilling, micro-credentialing, all those things. And there is so much work going on in government about how to do that. Again, I'm going to not hide behind, but use the kind of multifaceted approach, and there are a number of ways that we can tackle the skills problem and students coming to the country and staying and making a useful contribution to the country. Scholarships and the ongoing sort of engagement you do and linkages you do is one of those. Visa and interplays is another. But I think if you bring it back to the basic nuts and bolts of thing, it's about people to people, and it's about building relationships and integrating cultures. And I guess in my role in the Department of Education, that's kind of the kind of narrative that I'm sticking with. I know that was kind of skating over some of the issues, but
that's all right. Sure. Yeah.
So just quickly to add to that, I would just say it's a big problem for Australia as well, in terms of we're being targeted by other countries to poach our talent, and I'll single out the UK on that in their recent sort of push to become, world-leading science nation, etc. They specifically targeted, and we wanted to take Australians, basically. So it's an ongoing challenge for everybody, and Minister Husig's very much in tune to that, and he wants to sort of he calls it the brain regain, bring our people back, and also make Australia a hub where people want to sort of stay, not feel like, for example, we've gone through our education system, we've invested a lot in you as a country, but you feel to really make it, say, in the tech sector, well, you've got to leave Australia, go to the US, UK, Germany, wherever it might be, to say, no, Australia's got what you need right here, there's no need to leave. But it is an ongoing challenge, and I think particularly as a globe, we're still working through the challenges that, that the COVID-19 pandemic and associated lockdowns kind of left us with, where that mobility basically ground to a halt, and used to have sort of a lot more movement, people coming and going, and now a lot of those personal decisions about where to move or not, we're still sort of seeing the effects of that play out. But I just wanted to say it is an ongoing challenge, and we're sort of being targeted just as much as anyone else in that.
And as some of you may have guessed from my accent, I'm not from around here, and came as a student to Australia and stayed. And actually my scholarship was from the Canadian government. And I'm guessing, Mauricio, you're not from around here either originally, and that you probably came here as a student from your LinkedIn profile. So I'd be interested to hear your answer to that question as well around immigration and students staying.
Yeah, when I came here, I applied as a skilled migrant, actually. But I opened my first business was to bring students into Australia. And I found the problem to stay and remain in Australia, there was a lot of skepticism of people engage or employ Latin American people because the language barriers, not enough Australian companies, competitiveness, and after a lot of importation from China and everything, a lot of people left, and but a lot of people decide to stay because the quality of life or the families establish a new life and start a new career, a new start. But since now everything changed and COVID changed us all, and we are rethinking about how can we bring the brains back to Australia, how can we engage? I will say it's more about believing in Australian-made. Say, for instance, the lady that made the questions about the farm, what's her name? Excuse me, the lady. you make a questions about how to be competitive with farming. I will say your product will be by far the Australians very easy. If you engage with an association and you create Australian made and believe it's not just competing with the price, it's Australian made, quality. That's what it is. Australian love Australia. Australian land is beautiful, it's full of sun, it's full of fun, and it's lots of things to do, but we need to believe and we need to keep our brains here because we need to provide some work. And I have 2 more business and we're struggling because we don't have enough people. And the salaries here, the wages we pay for people are very high. Still, yeah, it's very hard to find people. Then probably that's what we need to focus more into believing in what we do and bring the brains back. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think, thank you very much for that. And I think we're just about running out of time. So unless anyone has any burning questions, the section in the, do you have just a very quick question? Wait.
I just have a question for Maurizio because I want to go back to the topic of agricultural waste real quick. So farming isn't my expertise, so I'm a little ignorant on this topic, but as far as I know, monocrop agriculture is the culprit to our depleting soil conditions and like the topsoil conditions. So like, where is that agricultural waste going? Because would it be as simple as leaving that waste back to the earth to replenish our soil conditions? So like, do you really need researchers and scientists to solve this waste problem?
The traditional way to solve this problem is to leave it, but the reality is that farmers need to replant it. And they take shortcuts and they buy pesticides, fumigants, whatever they need to kill the plants and kill the nematodes, and eventually they destroy the soil. They destroy the soil.
Yeah.
And that's the problem. And waiting for 5 months to decompose, or sometimes 6 or 8 months, is not a good way to approach agriculture in Australia. It's not. And these people could, if we enforce more into artificial intelligence and we create robotic machines that crop the waste, that sort of things, I will say that could be a good solution. And we can focus in some local research. Definitely, is something that make us. I mean, the cost of the cotton. Just an example, 1 kilo of pineapple fiber, which we can cottonize, use 1 liter of water because it's waste. 1 kilo of cotton use 270 liters of water, and we're still growing cotton. Why? This is ridiculous. And we don't use the waste. Why? Because we don't know.
Thank you very much.
That's fine.
Happy to
Okay, we Carolina has given us license to, because our next activity is afternoon tea. We can ask a question online. One more question from Jaime, and then I'll wrap up and we'll be finished. So.
Yes, just because we have another question from our viewers online. Hello, everyone. This is Grace Palma from Peru, studying environmental management at UQ. My question for the panelists is as follows. What is the way to establish collaboration and partnership between Australian and Peruvian universities to create new research, education, and innovation working together? For example, to work together on sustainable food, energy, and environmental innovation in Peru. So if we can have like a brief answer to that question, that would be good. Any one of you would like to address that?
Sure, I'll take it. Look, I think I think we've skirted or we've covered some of this already, but I think it's a combination of government to government and business and universities. I had a really interesting discussion at lunch about really interesting partnerships between businesses and universities, and how businesses can create that demand pool for the research topics and the research engagement, and then government can open those doors. So it's about government being able to smooth the way or assist with regulatory barriers, and then the businesses and universities can come in. I will also just mention a lot of the work that we're doing in things called qualifications recognition. So it's a really, really technical policy area and a really huge part of what the Department of Education does. And a lot of the work we're doing with our Latin American countries at the moment is about developing our qualifications recognition guides to allow that mobility for researchers. So that's a big part of it as well.
Great, thank you. And one more question, final one.
Sorry, I'm very sorry. Before the panel finishes, I would like to say something about science diplomacy in the perspective of Chile. I'm talking about Chile. I must say that a couple of years ago, we created a Ministry of Science, Technology, Knowledge, and Innovation. In the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Chile, we have a division of innovation, science, technology, and energy. We have signed agreement with California in the United States, Massachusetts in the United States. We have an MOU with Sao Paulo in Brazil. And so science for us is very important for our development. So we believe that the relation we have with Australia, with this university, is very important. CISAIRO also is in Chile. We have your institute also of mine in Santiago. So the collaboration since today will be very important for us. Thank you.
We've got the microphone right here, so we'll do one more, last one.
Just a question. I think it was Steph that mentioned that there was countries that are prioritized in these collaborations and countries that obviously aren't. It came to my attention that Chile, Peru, Brazil, Mexico, and I believe Colombia are the Latin American countries that are in your priorities at the moment. Those are also the countries that do the most mining, and therefore Australia has the most money invested in. Is there a link between those collaborations and the investments that Australia has made into those countries?
So just to clarify, under the Global Fund, it's only Brazil who's been identified as a partner country, a priority country. But that's not to say there aren't ongoing relationships with a whole host of other sort of Latin American countries through multilateral fora, through bilateral arrangements as well. Look, to the extent mining creates relationships, I mean, the whole how do you do bilateral relationships ultimately down to the people. So I'm not sort of going to necessarily comment on is there some sort of conspiracy between mining investment and that's where our concerns lie or anything like that. I mean, it's just those sustained relationships count, and whether it's through investment, through education links, through business links and other sort of ways that's how it flourishes and grows, and if it starts somewhere and continues from that. There's also in agriculture, obviously, there's a lot of links between a whole host of countries being in the Southern Hemisphere, and Ian was sort of talking about those links as well, with a lot of things in common that grow from that. But again, just to sort of mention, Australia's got its 134 science and tech arrangements with 60 plus partner countries, etc. So just because a country's not been singled out as a priority through the fund or through a particular government initiative, it doesn't mean the broader sort of bedrock is not as valued and as important. It's just, if you're going to go and be targeted and specific, you need some sort of framework around that. Do you want me to add to that? Sure.
I think we might sort of move to the wrap up now, unless you have something really quick.
I don't know if what you were looking at from where you got that information, but we actually specifically have a mining skills project in Latin America that we're working really closely with our partner countries on. So that's come out of the Innovation and Education Investment Fund that I spoke about earlier, and that's about sort of governments and institutions and local governments and industry to sort of upskill the mining industry in Latin America. So Australia's mining industry is really really focused on upgrading technology, advanced manufacturing, that sort of thing, and that because of the size of the industry in Australia and Latin America, that's definitely an area that we're focused on.
Thanks, Alison. So I'm just going to do a very quick wrap up because in the panelist notes it says moderator makes a succinct summary of everything that was said. I give up. But what I would say is, number one, it's always wonderful to end a panel with a lot of questions that didn't get answered. We'll try to send them on to the people who might be able to answer them and get them back to people who asked to the extent we can. I just had a couple of quotes that I wrote down from some of the talks that resonated with me, and one of those was, science diplomacy is about sustained relationships, and I think that was a great quote. And the other one from Steph was that it's a growth area, that Latin America is a growth area for Australia, but it's not mature, meaning there's a lot of potential to grow. And from Alison, the problems are global. I love that. And the whole aim of working together is to solve something bigger than both parties. So that's very exciting for me. And then, Mauricio, I agree with you that when I listen to the priorities, I think they're very worthy, but I think that the reality is quite different in terms of what the actual problems are and what the areas of collaboration are currently. So as a drive towards other areas, our current priorities are good, but they don't necessarily reflect what we're actually doing. And that sustainability, water, waste focus is a really important one. And I could go on, but I think I'm eating into your coffee time, so I just really wanted to thank all of the panelists for a fantastic session, and thank the audience online and in the room for your thoughtful and engaged questions. And please join me in thanking the panel for a fantastic job.
So yeah, thank you, Rick, for moderating the panel discussion, and for all our panelists. It was a really intense and good discussion about how we can incorporate the different perspectives between Australia and Latin America. I'm sure that we're going to continue the conversation in the afternoon tea. Just to stick to the program, our next session will start at 3:40 p.m. So please be back here for the start of the next panel. For our online viewers, I hope you have some afternoon tea to enjoy from the place where you are joining us today. And for those here with us at UQ, please enjoy the afternoon tea provided in the foyer. So see you here at 3:40. Welcome back, everyone. I hope that you enjoy that discussion in the afternoon tea. For those of you who were here with us today, and those of you online, we are gonna continue with our program for today. So I would like to invite Associate Professor Pedro Fidelman to moderate our second panel session on impactful collaboration. A reminder to please keep using our Padlet, as we really want to be a platform for discussion and collaboration. This will help us to see where we can support and connect to make change. So now, over to you, Pedro.
Thanks, Carolina. Gracias. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet today and pay my respects to elders past and present. I have to say, as a Brazilian Australian, it's a pleasure to be part of this panel today. The panel will discuss priorities for Australia, Latin America, cooperation in science and technology as we look towards the year 2030. Our panelists will have 3 minutes each to share their views on impactful collaboration, with Q&A session to follow. It's very similar format to the previous session, and I think it'll complement nicely the previous session, as we have 3 panelists with experience in industry, both in Australia and overseas. So I'm pleased to introduce our panelist, Dr. Alex Cook, General Manager for Missions Program within CSIRO, Australia's national science agency. Welcome, Alex. I also would like to introduce Mr. Rod Arenas, General Manager Commercial with Food Innovation Australia, which is a not-for-profit company responsible for delivering the activities of the Food Agribusiness Growth Centre. And welcome, Rod. And finally, I would like to invite Mr. Nimrod Clayman, Head of Entrepreneurship at UQ, which involves overseeing all the ventures activities, including one of Australia's most experienced accelerators, the iLab. Welcome, Nimrod. So as I said, together our panelists have a wealth of experience across several sectors relating to science and technology, both in Australia and internationally. And I would like to now invite our panelists to, you have 3 to 5 minutes to present your initial thoughts in terms of impactful collaboration. So I'll follow the order of the program. I'll start with Alex.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And I also wanted to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands that we're meeting on as well and pay respects to elders past and present. Also wanted to just call out, unfortunately, this is a manel. I'm here on behalf of Purana Mehta, who is the head of our global office within CSIRO, and she would have been a woman, would she have been here? And so I just wanted to call that out just for the record. But yeah, it's a real pleasure to be here and to have a conversation about some of the practical approaches that we're taking to collaboration on behalf of CSIRO. So I run what's called the Missions Program Office within the organisation, and Missions is a new way of delivering impact throughout our national science agency. So CSIRO is Australia's national science agency, and we are actually one of the world's largest purpose-led multidisciplinary science and research organisations. We have the vision of creating a better future for Australia and aiming to solve the greatest challenges through science and technology. We operate a unique space. We are market-led, but we're government-funded. It means that we can do things that governments can't do, and we can help facilitate and curate companies and other science agencies and institutions working towards common areas. And we've tried to formalise that through this new program, which is the Missions Program. Which is aiming to work with global partners, domestic partners, businesses, research organisations and governments to solve some of the most complex, systemic and multifaceted and urgent problems. And these problems are broadly aligned with the Sustainable Development Goals. And as you'll see, the SDGs all have this sort of timeline of 2030, and our missions all have an objective of trying to achieve a tangible time-bound outcome by 2030. And I was on one of the steering committees for one of our missions a while ago, and someone pointed out that 2030 is about 90 months away. And if you think about it from an engineering project, that's terrifyingly close. So we need to be doing work and trying to convene things really quickly to try and respond to some of the challenges. And CSIRO is trying to do this by starting the conversation and not trying to crowd out, but actually work with other partners to either work closely together or just to get alignment towards a shared objective. So some examples of some of the work that we're doing relates to establishing a new hydrogen industry, which we're doing with the industry department, which is now the Department of Industry, Science and Resources, which sits underneath the SDG around affordable and clean energy. We're looking at ending plastic waste, which sits underneath the Responsible Consumption and Production Sustainable Development Goal. Increasing drought resilience, which sits under the Life on Land goal. And it was interesting, there was a conversation about the impacts of drought that are happening in South America. You wouldn't think that Australia's got a drought problem at this very moment, but we have a drought that comes every couple of years, and we need to ensure that we're prepared for that in advance. And there may be some opportunities for us to look at where we can do something more practical around that. We're also looking at establishing a new food industry based around different forms of protein, which we call our Future Protein mission. And we're working on other missions which we plan to launch once they've stabilised their strategy and their pathway to achieve impact. And so these programs of work are based around scaling up the work that's done by our scientists within CSIRO. So we do lots of small projects with multiple people across the 5,500 staff that we have. This is trying to do fewer, bigger things and trying to bring all of that effort together in something more consolidated. And we're trying to do this, as I said, in partnership with governments, businesses, researchers domestically, but also leveraging our global partnerships. And so that includes working with our CSIRO's footprint globally, which includes our footprint in Latin America. And so we have an office, as has been mentioned, in Santiago. We have around 20 staff that have a mix of skills, including researchers, business development experts, project managers, and software engineers. And all of these staff are locally employed, and they speak both Spanish and English, which facilitates the translation on the ground. And CSIRO has been in Latin America for over 10 years, and we've developed a diverse portfolio of projects with government, research, and industry partners across the region. And we've provided a key entry point for CSIRO in the region and tried to coordinate our business development, ensure project delivery, and build capacity with our own team and our partners, and trying to transfer what are Australian-developed solutions into the Latin American market, and taking into account the different circumstances, contexts, and even environmental constraints that exist. And so based on this footprint, CSIRO's leveraged over 150 researchers from both Latin America and Australia to deliver over $84 million worth of projects in 5 of the countries in the region. It's resulted in the delivery of over 50 solutions to the market and over 300 scientific publications and reports. And so I just wanted to turn back in closing to the way that our missions program relates and connects into the work of Latin America. And some of the key themes that have been enduring with our 10-year partnership in Latin America are relevant to each of these missions. And so they relate to hydrogen, minerals, including critical minerals, earth observation, and water management. And these 4 areas represent the most significant areas of project development in terms of scale and potential impact. But CSIRO also has strong outreach across some other areas, including plastic waste, ecosystem assessments, agriculture, forest fire modelling, and other areas. And to give just a taste, some of the current projects underway include work around coastal zone planning, the development of regional climate futures, integrated coastal and water assessments, which we're doing with BHP in country, and working in partnership with the environment ministries. Developing, and I can talk about this in a little bit more detail later, of a satellite data cube platform. We call this Data Cube Chile, which is based on some work that we've been doing through Digital Earth in multiple different countries. Forest fire modelling and assessments, a project that we call the Hydra project, which is to develop a hybrid hydrogen-based engine for a mine haulage truck. So trying to help mining companies in transitioning to a low-carbon future by also complementing that with using new low-energy sources or greener sources of energy. Recent discussions related to plastic waste in Chile have generated significant interest as well, particularly in the possibility of conducting baseline assessments in line with CSIRO's previous work that we've done elsewhere in the world. We haven't done this before in Chile, so we're really excited by this. We're also delivering pilots through one of our other missions, which we call AquaWatch Australia, which aims to be a weather service for water quality. So to give you advance warning that you're going to have a problem with the water quality in a particular context, whether that's seawater or drinking water. And that clearly aligns with the Clean Water and Sanitation Sustainable Development Goal. And we're doing pilots in Chile and Colombia and elsewhere, looking with a main focus around harmful algal blooms, but we do have scope to scale into other potential use cases. We have some other engagements with HIF Global relating to e-fuels and hydrogen projects in the south of Chile as well. So to sum up, CSIRO's primary aim through these strategic initiatives are not only to just bring Australian solutions into the Latin American market, but to take into account local differences and also to return value to Australia by testing solutions in new markets and ultimately contributing to improved or updated platforms and technologies. And we hope that through this process we can scale our missions both within Australia but also with our global partners. So I'll leave it there.
Thanks, Alex. A great overview of CSIRO work in Latin America and in Chile. I'd like to invite Rod to make his initial considerations in terms of impactful collaboration.
Thank you, Pedro. And look, thank you for having me. And first of all, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we're here gathered today. I would like to also pay my respects to elders past and present. Before I get started, I thought I'll mention that I'm one of those students that came to Australia to study from Latham. And here we are many years later. Not that I'm that old, but many years later, I'm still here. And it's great to see so many South American and Central American students here at the University of Queensland. So keep up the good work and in flying the Latin American flag. Well done. Now, first of all, just a bit of background on FIAL and myself. So I'm originally from not from government, I'm from the private sector. And my career started in I've done everything from shipping companies to I've been a buyer both domestically and internationally. I've also, actually I bought everything you can think of. The only thing I haven't bought is electronics. I worked for large supermarkets as well too, here in Australia as well too. But also I was very involved over the years with helping to coordinate and help businesses to get export ready and to enter new markets that trade diversification side of things. So I think it's important to point out that I think the opportunities in the Latin American market are there, and Australia is a little quiet on that front. I think we could be doing a lot more. I think it's part of the educational process of teaching Australian businesses of the opportunities that are in Latin America. It's an emerging market, emerging middle class, and I personally get a lot of inquiries from all around South America on food. They are looking for Australian food products. Obviously, they're looking for very targeted food products, especially in the health and wellness space. But yeah, the opportunities are there, and I'm sure there'll be some questions throughout the afternoon. So first, what are we doing to help in the collaboration space? First of all, so Food Innovation Australia delivers the government Food and Agribusiness Industry Growth Centre. Excuse me. And we work with commercial research and government organisations across the agri-food value chain to catalyse the growth of the sector, which is around 180,000 businesses. The majority of them are SMEs. And these 180,000 businesses are the ones that are creating jobs, they're the ones that are innovating, and they need our support. And they can't afford to go to an international trade show without the support of organisations like us, like the Industry Growth Centre. FIAL is a not-for-profit organisation that was established by the Australian government to facilitate the development and growth of the food sector. In summary, we're here to be a catalyst that encourages the food sector to collaborate and to grow the share of Australian food in the global marketplace. Now, to add some detail on how we help in the industry and what we're doing behind the scenes for the sector, in 2020, the Australian government asked us to undertake a detailed analysis to determine the potential of the food and agribusiness sector. Our work showed that the entire sector has the potential to triple its value added basis by 2030, while also creating 300,000 new jobs for the economy. Now, when I say triple its value, I'm referring to $200 billion if we do it right and we get it right, and these businesses get the support that they need, not only from government and industry associations, but also these businesses also need to, put some effort into. They need to help themselves as well too. I mean, I guess they can't just rely on government and associations to do all the work for them. We also identified, 19 growth opportunities, which show how this $200 billion potential can come into reality. And I'm happy to go through those 19 growth opportunities later on if there is time, but or I'll provide that information for everyone, or it can be passed on to everyone that's here today, so you can look at the detail behind this report. Now, many of these opportunities are underpinned by the rapidly emerging technologies, such as the Internet of Things and advanced genomics, which transform how food is produced and how it is distributed and tracked in the supply chain, and how it finally reaches our plate. Keep in mind that Australia is set to become the world's 12th largest economy in 2023. It was quite interesting listening to the panel before in regards to the reputation that Australia has in international markets. And I can tell you that there used to be a time, based on what I'm seeing, that you would go to the United States to look at the innovation in food, the innovation in beverage. They're actually coming here to Australia now to look at what we have. So I think we all need to pat ourselves on the back. We're doing some terrific work here nationally. Of course, there's more work to be done, but Australia across the globe is seen as, we have, a green, clean, high biosecurity products that everyone wants from a food perspective, but also that innovation element continues to grow. I guess from my perspective is putting the commercial realities onto that innovation, because it's great to do a research paper, but you need to get a return on investment on the research and commercialize that innovation. Now, exporting businesses also, just so we all understand the opportunity here, employ 28% more staff than non-exporting businesses. And on average, they pay 11% more or 11% higher wages. And now that inflation is pretty high, we all need a pay rise, so export businesses can afford to give their employees a pay rise. So again, that's creating jobs and helping the economy. Look, finally, because I think my time is up, given the economic supply chain and geopolitical challenges, it's very important for us more than ever to help these businesses and to secure strong and reliable supplier relationships. The fifth industrial revolution is poised to underpin a future where buyer-supplier relationships are built on a problem solution and value creation by a means of technology. Hence, we've created the Australian Food and Beverage Catalogue, which is now on version 11 from memory. It continues to evolve. It's no longer just a directory with hundreds of companies from across the country that are all export ready, but it's now an interactive platform that was utilized to run numerous events, virtual events during the pandemic. And now we're evolving, now that the borders are open and now that we can travel again, we're actually utilizing the platform to do the introductions with the buyers, because we have thousands of buyers on this platform, and it's free, by the way. So if you know any food businesses looking to start their exporting ventures or emerging exporters, they can go onto this platform and register for free. We connect them with buyers from across 42 countries across the world. And what we're doing at the moment is that we provide a service of, they have the virtual one-on-one on video, on their computer, and then we do the offline where we take the companies to market, to meet with those buyers. So an example is we have Food and Hotel Vietnam coming up, Ho Chi Minh City on the 7th of December. We've done the virtual event with Vietnamese buyers, and now we're going to take these companies to market in December to meet those buyers in Hanoi and in Ho Chi Minh City. So we're using technology to create those connections and accelerate the commercial outcome. I'm going to leave it at that. I've got a few more things to say, but thank you again, Pedro.
Thank you, Rod. Very, very nice overview of the agribusiness and food sector. I'd like now to invite Nimrod to make his initial considerations.
Excellent. Thanks, Pedro. So I'm the head of entrepreneurship here at the University of Queensland, and I'm responsible of all the entrepreneurship programs, which are all extracurricular. So we are not academic, and our main function in the university is to inspire, motivate, and create future founders. And as part of that, we want to also create global founders. We believe, like Australia, one of the best countries in the world, but the market in Brisbane, it's very small, and the market in Australia, it is considerably small. And if you're going to put all the effort to start a business, why not to try and conquer the world? So in 2016, I pitched a new program to the university, which was to take students to do a 4 weeks internship in other ecosystems in the world that are more mature. Okay? The university liked the idea, gave me the funds, and that's how we started the Global Startup Adventure. My point is here that what is a more mature ecosystem? And that's related to your question about impact collaboration. if you want to see a very mature innovation and entrepreneurship ecosystem, which the biggest example, of course, it's Silicon Valley, you have three pillar components. You have the founders in one side, you have the industry that have a lot of problems, and then you have the higher education research institutes that can provide solution, but also produce founders. So in the States, we have a very strong ecosystem, and we know all the cases. But our first destination actually was China. In 2016, the National Party dictated that innovation is a priority for the country, and when in China they say it is a priority, you have no choice. And that was excellent because they created a very mature ecosystem. So 2016 was the first time that we took students to explore the ecosystem, and what we saw that was quite amazing because you had the industry, universities, and startups all working together, creating a very solid ecosystem. Okay, but that was through government direction. Second destination, just to learn another mature ecosystem, we took the students to Israel. Okay, Israel, it's well known as the startup nation, where they have the highest number of startup per capita, highest R&D spending per capita, and literally everyone that you talk is a kind of an entrepreneur. So there you have the same ecosystem with the government as another component, but with not fully support. Plus, you have the army that is a quite important player, feeding talent and also solution into the ecosystem. So that was the second example of collaboration, impactful collaboration. Third destination that we took the students was Singapore, where again, you have a very strong universities, very strong industry, and the government spending a lot of resources, funding for founders that they want to take their idea to the next level. So what we did through this program is to show different examples of very mature ecosystems where you can see a very strong and tight collaboration between the different components. Here in Australia, and if we talk about Brisbane, we are still working on that. We do have a few examples of collaboration. And let me just share one of examples from this year. So as Pedro mentioned, we run iLab Accelerator. It's the longest run accelerator here in Australia and one of the most successful one coming out of universities. So this year, this cohort, we had a founder that I don't know exactly what was the nature of the agreement, but worked with CSIRO in the food sector. I think was lactoferrin. They wanted to synthesize human milk without using cow milk. At the moment, to produce human milk from cows, I think you need 200 liters to produce 1 liter of human milk, which is, of course, not very efficient. And through science coming from CSIRO, they could done it or do it in a fraction of the cost and of the time. So saying that, we provided all the skills, the talent. CSIRO presented all the science and backed up by all the researchers. And you can see a great example of working in collaboration, creating new initiatives, new opportunities to take to market. So that's just one example. So iLab produced more than 220 startups in different areas. And the idea, again, it's not to work in a silo, not to work independently, and using all the resources around, because at the end, these success stories will benefit everyone. So bring more research, more funding, create more job opportunities, and I believe that's the only way to go forward.
Thanks, Timrod.
Thanks a lot. It's another view of, we had Cyril with a range of activities and sectors in terms of research in science and technology. We had food and agribusiness, and we have the entrepreneurship side of things with startups, and actually there was a question here that I'll come to that later, that mentioned what are other market opportunities beyond commodities, but we can come back to that later. Before we open the floor to questions, I have one question, a brief one. We are here in this panel on impactful collaboration, and I would like to ask our panelists, based on your experience, what are the key requirements for impactful collaboration? What is impactful collaboration in your field?
Would you like me to start? Yeah,
yes, please.
Excellent. I mean, so from my perspective, I think there's some very basic requirements around information sharing and knowing who exists in the market to work with and to cooperate with. And so that's a really key and critical piece of information sharing is the most important piece. Alignment to a common goal, whether that's a smaller goal or a much bigger one. So from my perspective, running the missions program, I have an interest in trying to incentivize impactful collaboration around a shared objective that we've got. Funding is really important, but I think it's critical not to get caught up in the sources of the funding and not to always go to the usual suspects. And I think the way in which different players in the system are operating is changing now. I think there's in some economies it's different. So some national states would provide funding, whereas I think CSIRO is driven very much by trying to find sources of funding from within the market and the private sector, and trying to use that to achieve impact. So I'd say there's some critical elements of successful collaboration. Yeah.
Yeah, no worries. I'm going to use an example to illustrate what I consider true collaboration. Just returned a couple of weeks ago from Food Hotel Asia. We delivered an Australian stand. And when I say an Australian stand, it's not a Queensland stand, it's not a New South Wales stand, a Victorian stand, an Australian stand. Within that space, we had companies from across the country, and they were all working together and collaborating. The states contributed towards the cost of the space. And we also, I'll go back a couple of steps. What happens usually in an international trade show with food is that you have the individual states with their own space. But you don't see that with Latin America. When you have the Chile stand, you have the Chile stand. When you have the Peru stand, you have the Peru stand. But look, it's just the way it is. But we're trying to promote that true collaboration by everyone working together and coming together and sharing resources. So I think that's very important. Sharing the cost as well too is very important. But also too, the other thing that we do as well too is that when we run a trade show, we consolidate all the stock in one central location. So we send all the samples to the trade show in advance, whether they're chilled or frozen or perishable goods or dry goods. It all gets there. It all gets to the stand a day before the show. We put the stock on the shelves. And then I look at some of the other states, the exporters are bringing the samples in the suitcases. And a lot of the time, the samples, they don't even have samples, it's just empty packaging. We want to make sure that they have plenty of stock. I mean, most companies took about 100 kilos worth of stock of samples because we need to give these buyers the sampling and they need to try the products. So there's one of the many examples, but just that's how I see true collaboration moving forward. It's just sharing those resources.
So thank you. So impactful collaboration, again, using the example of my world, where I'm using, let's say, researchers in university, and then industry, where I include industry like startups, government, and corporates. So, and that's what we do here in the university, because we train and skill up all these researchers to be able to consider different pathways, not only academia. So there are two main components that they need to work just to create an impactful collaboration. It's communication and pace. Okay, so communication, because a lot of the researchers, they feel very comfortable in their area of research, They know back to front everything, and when they talk with the industry, they use all this language and jargon, and the industry feels a little bit intimidated, and sometimes it's not very relevant. They are looking for a solution, and they don't care what there is beneath the bonnet of the car. So that's one, and researchers need to adapt to the industry. They need to know how to talk to them and how to express and convey the solution in a very simple language. And the second one is pace, okay? Industry move in a pace that sometimes academia is a bit slower, and they need to make sure that they all move at the same pace. You know, we have a solution that need a solution now, and we don't have time, and if you cannot provide the solution, the industry will look for someone else to provide that. So that's quite important, and that's something that we try to show to the students when we take them overseas and see how industry move in a really fast-moving world.
Thank you. So now I'd like to open the floor to questions.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Pedro, and thank you to all the panelists. My question is for Mr. Cook about plastic waste, and specifically plastics in the ocean. I have seen different initiatives everywhere in Australia, from the Governor General's Wife Initiative to private companies in Melbourne working on biotechnology and science and so on in order to deal with this topic, to programs of the new department in charge of climate change and water in Canberra. The question is, where do all these initiatives meet? Is there in this field something like this positive triangle formed by government, academia, and private sector, where science institutions will be related to the academia field, especially now that, as you know, the UN is about to draft a new convention on plastic pollution, specifically or especially in the oceans, and national positions need to be defined. The Australian policy will be based on a scientific advisory board or body or committee. As Ecuador is part of the drafting committee, we are doing so, and we're interested to know how you are working on this difficult reality here in Australia, and in which way are you going to confront this huge opportunity to deal with this world crisis. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you very much for that question. It's very timely, and so I won't pretend to suggest that this is the only coordinating group or reference group that exists, but through our Ending Plastic Waste mission, which has an aspiration of reducing the amount of plastic waste entering the environment by 80% by 2030. That gives us an umbrella to try and achieve some of the imperatives that are outlined in the work that the UN is doing. And we're working very closely with the Department of Climate Change, dovetailing with the work around the National Waste Action Plan that Australia has. But because there are a multitude of different approaches to try and respond to this problem, we're attempting to put some form of coordination around it and to put some coherence. And so that includes looking at very basic scientific approaches to breaking plastic down into its component parts and reintroducing that as fuel streams, principles around circular economy, where we try and work with the plastics producers to have circularity principles at the point of production. But we're also doing some work from a science perspective around what does a standards-based framework look like for things like when companies call their plastics biodegradable or recyclable. Some of those words are not defined or backed up with any regulatory framework, and so trying to facilitate a standards-based approach from that perspective, working closely with the department. So we're approaching it from that perspective, and very happy to try and feed in through that. And our colleagues in the industry department and in DFAT are working very closely through the UN channels to make sure that that's reflected at a multilateral level. And they're relying heavily on the advice that's coming from CSIRO about about what's feasible and what's achievable in terms of embedding rules in those systems.
And there's also like basic things. For a while, Australia depended on the international, like China, to do the recycling of the waste within Australia, and then we sort of lost that opportunity to create an industry. I mean, lost it then, but now there's a huge opportunity for markets. So you need to create an industry for recycling.
But it can't be. It's one thing to kind of say that there's that opportunity, but yeah, the real challenge is what is the science that is needed to actually do something with all of that waste, and that's a massive problem. That's a huge problem. And so we're approaching it from different perspectives, and working with the companies is one element of those.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Thank you.
Hi there. I'm James from the Department of Industry. I was really interested, Nimrod, in your views around kind of what are the opportunities within the Latin American startup and innovation sectors for Australian startups, because I don't think it's an area that Australian startups are first going to. They're going to the US, they're going to North America and Europe. And so I guess unpacking what the sectoral opportunities are for startups to consider in Latin America becomes, it's a better conversation to actually go into the weeds. So we know that there's huge fintech opportunities across LATAM with a lot more people becoming banked. But are there other sectors that you would say have greater opportunities for startups than others?
Absolutely. So first, thank you very much for the question. And it's something that I constantly think about, what are the opportunities when we travel overseas to offer. And to be quite honest and specific, that's something that I tell students constantly. So one of the biggest opportunities, it's around digital transformation. The reality is like countries in South America are lagging behind about the digital transformation, and being in Australia, we are quite privileged to enjoy a digital life with a lot of solution that can be easily replicated. So it's not about innovation, it's just to adjust the solution to the country and to implement. So that can be in so many different sectors. So we're talking about from selling cars online all the way to digital banking, booking appointments, you name it. So I think there are so many, again, opportunities that it's just to see where is the gap and develop something that we know that works here in Australia.
Maybe to break up the seriousness, has everybody or anybody here tried the ice cream of the future? And does that comply with the regulations from the Food Administration? I was very surprised going on the mall here in Brisbane, and I was offered different flavors, and they are all byproducts of insects, so very rich in protein. And I don't know if anybody or this thing has been successful or whether it was invented here in Australia. I don't know.
I know that in Southeast Asia they eat insects for snacks. So you can go to the street cart and get insects of all sorts. But I've never heard about the ice cream.
I didn't try it.
Oh.
There's a few different, not just ice cream, there's various different takes of different products made out of insects. But I don't think the Australian consumer has the appetite for it yet. It's more something maybe in Asian markets. But there's a lot of, there's going to be, potentially there's a shortage of food moving forward, in the future. Australia, we're in a very lucky position here in this country that we produce more than enough food, not only to feed the 25 million people here in this country, but we can afford to feed the rest of the world. Last number that I looked at, I think it was 60. We can feed 60 million people. So we're very lucky from that perspective. But yeah, look, there's all sorts of innovations with different types of, it's just but it doesn't necessarily mean that it makes it to a supermarket, because sometimes it's a bit of a gimmick, really, some of these products. But in saying that, it's also, there could be other markets overseas that want that product. Just because it's not viable here, it doesn't mean you can't sell it overseas. I mean, I remember we were selling fresh air to China. I don't know if you've seen there were cans of air that was being sold to China a few years back. I don't know if they're still going on, but yeah, there's lots of opportunities out there. And I just wanted to add to Nimrod's comments in regards to the digital solutions and digital transformation moving forward. That platform that we created, which is absolutely free, is we're doing consolidation of freight through that platform. Buyers can connect directly with the suppliers. You have on that platform everything from alcoholic beverages to food, to health and wellness products, to fruit. Is something that continues to evolve. We continue to invest in that platform, and it's created specifically for the sector, for the industry, to help them, especially for the SMEs, to help them find a potential new customer overseas. Because what these businesses need is not just another webinar. They need a real customer that's going to raise a purchase order. That's what keeps the lights on, and that's what keeps the factory going, and that's what helps the economy overall as well.
Just to add a little bit of extra detail. So CSIRO did a roadmap on protein opportunities, and we did specifically look at the opportunity around insect protein. It all comes down to, we can do all the science you want, you can push it onto people, but if they don't want it, they won't buy it. But there are opportunities for the insect forms and other forms of protein to go into the animal market and the livestock market, and then you might find that your beef has got a slightly different taste. But it all comes down to what people are prepared to pay for. And I think the name that didn't come to you was Eden Brew before, which is the company that's producing the milk without the cow. Yeah. So this sort of synthesized lactoferrin protein, and it's produced with Science. Yeah. But what the real question is the market going to buy it? Or are people just happy to pay whatever they pay for the milk that they get? And so that's a really fundamental question that we need to just be mindful of.
There's a company here in Brisbane or in Queensland that sells camel milk as well too. They make chocolate out of camel milk. Again, it's up to the individual. But yeah, there's all sorts of, and I think this is where Australia is in a great position, especially in food and beverage. Because the rest of the world is watching. They are looking at Australia, and they're looking at the hard work that's going on behind the scenes here on the science and innovation and the work that CSIRO does and the universities is not going unnoticed. And this is why the rest of the world wants the products that we have.
And I'm not sure if the insect protein would be popular in Latin America as well. Before we take another question, is there a question from the online audience?
Not from the online chat just yet, but from Padlet.
All right.
But we can probably go one here.
I just want to know really what's the take of the panel. We know that the biggest challenges of our time is energy transition, environment and climate change, health and nutrition, social inclusion, and cultural diversity, as well as data and artificial intelligence. And we also know right now that indigenous knowledge and wisdom plays a major role in addressing our sustainable development challenges, not only Western-based science. So my question is, how can we effectively incorporate indigenous knowledge in whatever undertaking, whether in science, in technology, or what can we do actually to effectively address this indigenous knowledge in such a way that we can really make an impactful or transformative collaboration to address our sustainability challenges?
fantastic question. And so through our missions program, we were challenged by the fact that the program has a word that actually creates a lot of sensitivity for Indigenous people. The concept of a mission is actually quite an upsetting term. And that caused us to really think quite seriously about the role of First Nations in the program. And we've committed to, through our Reconciliation Action Plan that we have within the organisation, to have Indigenous knowledge systems and Indigenous researchers embedded right at the very beginning of the science process. You don't wait until you've come to the end and go, what do you think? How does it translate? You have to have that co-production element built in. You have to do that respectfully and carefully. We've discovered, for example, with some of our missions that have a very geographical base, so around drought resilience and so on, Indigenous knowledge around the way the landscape operates and weather systems are actually very micro-focused. You learn things that you wouldn't learn through traditional Western approaches to science, and so we're finding it extremely constructive in terms of shaping up the direction of our missions. So that's, I guess, one way in which we're doing it.
We actually took a couple of Indigenous companies to Food Hotel Asia. Both of those companies were from New South Wales, and they had funding through government to develop those traditional foods, and they did extremely well at the show, extremely well. In fact, I'm pretty sure they've secured some business. So there's a lot of work going on behind the scenes to continue to encourage more Indigenous businesses to get out there and promote and sell the products. But the key here is that they do it themselves too, not just through a consultant or through someone else. It's about empowering them to do to use the knowledge and also sustainability as well too, because they know their land, they know that we can learn from them as well too at the same time. It was quite interesting as well too. There was a company that we took as well too, that a seaweed company, which it was the first seaweed farm in Australia, and they were selling pasta, they were selling all sorts of products made out of seaweed as well too. So there's a lot of those businesses that they're doing extremely well. They're small businesses, but little by little they continue to grow through funding through us or through government or through industry associations. But I think we're on the right track, but there's still a lot of work to be done.
So just to complete with a story, and again, I don't want to restrict only to Indigenous, because I think there are a lot of knowledge out there that we are not capturing. And just to share a story of one of the speakers, mentors in my programs, his name is Jim Aylward, and he is a very famous scientist, because what's happened, when he was a young researcher, his mom told him that through one of the plants in the bush, after getting burned by the sun, if you put the plant, there is an effect, an improvement. And he said, let's research that and see what's the real scientific evidence. He was a researcher in CSIRO, without going into much details, but he asked CSIRO if he can use the facilities, to keep doing the research and facilitate, and they say yes, do that at nighttime, after hours, and just to make the story short, literally he found an ointment for cancer treatment, which is he patented and sold that to a pharmaceutical for $170 million. And all started with this piece of information, of knowledge from his mom about one of the bush plants. So that's an extreme and successful story, and I'm sure the journey was more than that. But the story reflects that there is knowledge out there among Indigenous communities and among other communities that we need to start to explore. And again, we have all the facilities. We start with an assumption, an hypothesis, and see where it leads to. If we don't see any scientific evidence, we kill it. But I think it's worth to explore and capture all this data.
We're getting very close to 4:40, but you have another question?
Very short, just to add something to that. This could be a very important field for cooperation among our countries and our regions. We call it traditional knowledge. And well, as you said, it has to be treated in a special way. We have to be very careful even at the level of WIPO. But there are many applications for medicine and for other fields that are indigenous people and have and need to be treated by the science. But maybe in Latin America there is not all the scientific knowledge to transform it into science. So also the $17 million will not go to the pharmaceutical, but to the people who really use it for years in order to solve their own problems. So it would be very good to continue exploring on this cooperation. Today in Canberra, together with Guatemala, we started the first meeting of the Committee on Indigenous and Aboriginal People. So I was just thinking that this could be a field for cooperation when we are working together as regions. Thank you.
On the collaboration with Latin America, we did an event about 3.5 years ago, 4 years ago now, Pacific Alliance, La Alianza del Pacífico. We facilitated that in Melbourne, here in Brisbane and in Sydney. So I'll put it out there. I'm happy to have that conversation again and have to have something tangible happen. Do it again. More than happy to put that together. I think not only Australian businesses will benefit from learning from those type of companies in South America, but also at the same time, I know that a lot of Australian exporters that are looking to enter the Latin market are also looking to purchase some ingredients from Latin America as well too. So I think is again the true collaboration of working together. So I'll put my hand up. More than happy to have that conversation on the Pacific Alliance. Or it doesn't have to be the Pacific Alliance. Could be different countries from Latin America. We can do a presentation because there's some misconception. I think from Australian exporters or Australian businesses on Latin America, and we need to continue the journey of educating them so they understand the market a little bit better.
I encourage you to approach the panelists during the next break. During there's drinks. There will be drinks, networking drinks. So I encourage you to approach the panelists with questions. But I'm conscious of the time. I think it was a fantastic. I have my own question here. That is, when I asked about the key requirements for impactful collaboration, I was going to ask where does the government fit in it in terms of policies that enable collaboration? But we don't have time for that, I think, during the break. But I learned a great deal today, and I hope you enjoyed this session as much as I did. I would like to thank our panelists for this fantastic discussion and invite you to join with me in thanking them for the great collaboration. Thank you.
Thank you to all of you for this panel discussion. It was really interesting to see different perspectives in terms of how we can build a more impactful collaboration between Latin America and Australia. So thank you for all your insights and everyone for your questions. Now I'm honored to invite His Excellency Mr. Donald Recinos, Ambassador of Guatemala, to the lectern to give his closing remarks.
Good afternoon to everyone. I would like to acknowledge Vice President and Vice Chancellor Mr. Rongyu Lee, the professors, authorities, and students of the University of Queensland, members of the Australian government here present today, all the guests, and my fellow ambassadors. It's an honor to represent the Latin American embassies in these closing remarks and express our gratitude to the university for organizing this successful colloquium and helping to strengthen the relationship between Australia and our countries. We all feel very at home when we visit Queensland because there's a consensus amongst all of us that this state and this city particularly is where we have been mostly welcomed, and it's where we have found the warmest people. Personally, Brisbane has become my favorite city. And I think that I share that idea with many of my colleagues here. It's really hard to make closing statements when the people that precede you are such outstanding presenters and experts in what they do. But I will try to do my best to bring some conclusions from what was heard today. I believe that the collaboration between government, private sector, and academia is not only possible, but it is very necessary. But the reality of the world today makes it indispensable that collaboration transcends boundaries. The problems that humanity faces today are not problems that we had faced before, and they're not possible to fix if all the countries don't work together. We have just come out of a pandemic, and there will probably be more of them. Water resources are scarce, food security is under serious threat, natural disasters are affecting all of our nations, and climate change has put humanity on the verge of extinction. That is why government, private sector, and the academia must come together through scientific diplomacy. Scientific diplomacy might save our very existence. It has been said today that diplomacy always looks for interests, and there's always bilateral win-wins. Not in this case. In this case, the interest is global, and the win-win is for everybody. We're all in this together. Every country, regardless of how small it may be, has something to teach, and every country, regardless of how big it may be, has something to learn. As my president said in the United Nations a few days ago, it's now or never. The preservation of humanity depends on it. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. I would like now to welcome UQ's Acting Pro Vice Chancellor for Global Partnerships, Ms. Dala Dowsett, to the lectern to say a few words.
Thank you, Ambassador, for your closing comments. Much appreciated. And thank you, Carolina. This brings us to the end of the 2022 UQ Latin American Colloquium. I think I have been to 8 out of the 15, so I'm really delighted to connect back in this year and see so many familiar faces, but also some new friends joining us at UQ. It's been a genuine pleasure for all of us involved to welcome you back to UQ if it's not your first time, but also to welcome you here to our lovely campus for the first time. So thank you so much for making time and travelling here to meet with us. I'd like to pay special thanks to our speakers and our moderators and our panellists. Without them, we don't have the content to open up the discussions that we've had today, and we're really very grateful for everybody joining in and offering so many diverse perspectives on the topics that we covered. In this colloquium, its 15th, that, as I said, we sought to identify and unpack the priorities for science diplomacy. And I think we can see just how much connectivity science brings, not only in terms of academia, where often it's where it's driven from, but with industry, and I'd like to add also with community. I don't think we touched quite enough on the community aspect, because everything that we do, and as the Ambassador just said, it's for everybody. So we want to create that maximum impact, maximum benefit, and ultimately solve those huge global challenges that we've all talked about today. I think there's many, many mutual priorities between Australia and Latin America, and between Australia and various countries in Latin America. So I think we really have to think about how do we best find those connections and how do we best pursue those opportunities that come forward. So we're really keen to keep discussions going, very happy to take more questions, to send more information through from the university, and to see how we can follow on from the great discussions we've had today. I think just to sum up on a couple of the things that I picked up out of this, and the team's been great at also picking out some of the key items that came out of discussions. I think if I hark back to Ian Kemish's opening address or keynote address, he said there's a tendency to talk about positive bilateral relationships as the end goal. He said as a key performance indicator in its own right, but strong relationships are only the starting point, and then you have to move to the outcomes that you want from those relationships for mutual benefit. Steph, I think, went on to say government can't do it all, and I think we've heard this afternoon that it does need that amazing collaboration that we have a platform for, and so how do we build on those connections so that it's not landing in the lap of only one element of the cooperation. We've heard lots about the different areas of work, energy, climate change, food security, health, and that goes to that very point that there are just so many opportunities that we could be pursuing. I think part of the fun now is to work out what we can really focus on and what we can do together. It gives us great confidence to pursue those partnerships and collaborations because we do see the interest that's generated just by attendance and participation here, but also in terms of identification of those opportunities. Can I say a huge thank you again to everybody for being involved in this. It's been amazing, and I would be terribly remiss if I didn't thank the Global Partnerships team, so Irene, Rachel, for all the hard work in putting this together. There's also a team of lovely people back at the office who have been in and out today, but they've done a tremendous job pulling all of this together, particularly in hybrid form, which gives everybody a great opportunity to participate. And last but not least, Carolina, thank you so much for emceeing today. It's been wonderful to have your knowledge and expertise. Thank you so much. And please join us for some refreshments and some more dialogue. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so this brings us to the end of today's program. Just a reminder that this event will be uploaded in the coming days, so stay tuned, please. All registered attendees will receive an email when it is uploaded. You will find in the program a QR code and a link to the event survey. It is also being displayed behind me. So for those of you who are online, thank you for joining us today. I hope that you have a lovely evening as part of this conversation in terms of how we move forward in collaborating between Latin America and Australia. For everyone else, please join me at the networking reception, which is just outside the door of this building. Thank you everyone for coming, and see you in our next version of the Latin American Colloquium.